I'm just here to share my tips, also answer questions that maybe you have wanted to know, but also kind of give you some little reminders of what these products are and how they differ from each other, because we are going to cover Distress inks, and we're also going to cover Distress Oxide, of course, relating to the ink pads. Now, both of these are a felt ink. This is a water-based ink. Distress ink pads, these are a water-based dye. Okay, dyes being translucent, we can see through them. So anytime you have a dye ink, dyes are translucent. Remember that. We can see through that, which means we can build layers, and we can, if we put pink over yellow, we're going to get an orange color or kind of a coral color. So we have the ability to see through inks. Distress oxides. Now an oxide is a fusion of a dye and a pigment. Dyes being translucent, but pigments being opaque. So we cannot see through pigments. And if it's a true pigment ink pad, solid pigment, then it's completely opaque. But because Distress Oxide are kind of like, I'm not even going to call it a hybrid, because it isn't a hybrid pad in the terms of our industry, but it is a fusion of dye and pigment. So it has some opaque properties, but it also has some vibrant translucent properties of the dye that is combined with this, right? Now, when it comes to these ink pads, I am a purist in the sense of I like what I call the regulation size ink pads, right? I like these 3x3 ink pads. These have 5 times more ink than a mini, but I also understand that not everybody has space for everything. Not everybody has a budget for everything. So it is different, okay? But in the world of our Reinker Distress inks, minis are available only in the ink pads. And people ask all the time, are you going to have mini oxides? Right now, no. And the reason is the formulation is not stable on this tiny little surface. I mean, you can see the difference between these, much smaller, okay? This only has 1/5 the amount of ink in this ink pad. So if you only use minis, that's okay. You know, maybe you just do a little stamping, maybe you work in a planner, maybe you just make cards occasionally. But keep in mind that these tend to dry up quicker. Not because it's a different ink that's in here, it just doesn't have the same amount of ink, right? So you're going to need to re-ink these more frequently than this. You can't expect to get something small like this and have it have the longevity or last like a regular ink pad, okay? And people do ask, they're like, are you going to do oxides? It's just the fact that when you put this formulation on something small, the dye and pigment start to separate, and that's just not what I want to do. So, you know, I would rather have the lab and the chemists at Reinker work on new products instead of continue to try to work on this. It may happen someday. I mean, let's face it, these guys, it was, gosh, 10 years before these came out as minis, so you never know. But this is really what I like. And we're going to go through the differences of both of these ink pads. And I do use my minis. I use them a lot for certain techniques because they are convenient. So it just depends on your budget. Maybe you have both like I do. All right. So the other thing we're going to talk about is storage. And this is not a one answer question, because people do email all the time about storage. You need to store your inks how they work for you. All right. But ink is a suspended medium, right? It sits in this felt pad, and a felt pad means it's that little fibrous felt core laminated with a piece of fabric. And that fabric is on there because it keeps all those little fuzzies from coming off on your stamps. That's why it's got that fabric top. But the core of this is felt. And I prefer a felt pad over a foam because I don't like how squishy they are. And I also don't like how wet they are. Some people go, oh man, I love these ink pads because it's got this foam pad and they're much wetter. If that's your jam, go for it. I don't like a wet, sappy pad because I think that they stamp really messy. It smears more, it gets more color than I want. But that's the other thing. If you have your own ink pads and you want them juicier, you could go in with a Reinker and you could re-ink a brand new pad because you want it wetter than the standard that I like it to be, okay? That's your choice. You do you. But when it comes to storage, you can store them flat. You can store them upside down. Now, whether they're flat or upside down, it doesn't make the ink rise to the surface, contrary to popular belief, right? Ink is suspended in there. It's not floating in that surface. It's sitting in there like a wet sponge. So when you have this ink pad, whether it's sitting this way or this way, it's not going to make that ink pad any juicier on the top. And I know people just swear by the fact that it does. And if that makes you sleep good at night or makes your creative mojo just that much more intense, go for it. But here's the big question. The big question is sideways, right? Some people have them in little drawer filing systems. Some people may use them in the storage tin. Now, distress pads, when they were launched, they were in a rack. That stand up like this, right? Their display rack for retail stores stand up like this. You might see them in stores hanging up like this. So when people say you can't store them like this, well, how would that even be possible? Of course you can. That's why we sell them like this. That's why they're displayed like that. However, if you live in a very humid climate, right, your ink pads could weep, meaning there's so much humidity that it's actually making that ink start to rise to the surface. It's kind of like a wet kitchen sponge. A wet kitchen sponge in Arizona is going to dry up in seconds on the counter. A wet kitchen sponge in Florida is probably going to stay wet indefinitely. So if you live in a humid area, or maybe it's even depending on altitude, whether it's sea level or high altitude, and you find that by storing your ink pads sideways, they are weeping, then don't store them sideways. That's the solution. Because people go, well, I've stored them like this and they're leaking. What do I do? You don't store them that way is really the only answer. Okay. Now let's say you have a tin and you're like, well, all right, but I have this tin and it stores sideways. Great. Then stand your tin up, right? The tin is flat on one side for that very reason, that you can store them this way. Or if you take out that insert and flip it over, you can have them upside down if that is your preference, right? But that's what you need to know. Now, personally, I keep mine just stacked like this in a spinner, but I like to show the tins because some people store them in the tins this way. And really, when I was demoing and traveling around, I really love having them in the tins. So hopefully that is kind of just the overview of how you store them, right? However works for you, and as long as you don't have any leakers. Now, the other thing about leakers is, let's say you personally over ink the ink pad, right? If you like a juicy ink pad, because some people say, oh, a wetter ink pad is better for whatever you're doing, blending, embossing, stamping, and you over ink your ink pad, well, that could also impact how it leaks, because that material can only hold so much. And we'll get into re-inking a little later. Okay, so let me just move these off to the side right now. And we'll talk about kind of the core differences in this. And I'll just grab some paper, okay? Before I get into technique, we're just going to talk about the difference between these two mediums. And I don't know if I even pulled the same color. I really didn't, but that's okay. We'll get the gist of this. All right, so I'm going to take a Distress ink pad, and I'm just going to push down on the surface. Now, when I press this ink pad down on the surface, you see this is just watercolor cardstock. You see that ink pad, and people would look at that and go, oh, my ink pad's dry, because maybe you're doing this on a surface. You're like, oh, I don't have any ink, right? Ink is a suspended medium. So the more you press down, the harder you press down, the more ink is going to come to the surface out of your ink pad. So keep that in mind even when you're inking a stamp. If you're just doing this on a stamp, you're not getting any ink out to transfer onto your stamp. But if you're doing this on your stamp, and you're pressing, you're getting color to transfer, right? That's really, really important to understand how that ink pad is designed to be used, okay? It is designed to be pressed down, whether it's onto a stamp or whether it's onto a background. Now, an oxide is different simply because it is that fusion of dye and pigment. So you see it more. It is more intense, and because of those solid bits, I'll just show you, like when I press down on this, you're going to see that it has what appears to be a much wetter property, and that's simply because of that pigment on there. The pigment extends the open time of this ink, right? A dye, because it's translucent, wants to soak right into the paper. Pigment, because they're particles, it actually wants to sit on top a little bit longer. But same rules, if you just did this with your oxide, you're not going to get much ink on your stamp. If you did this, press, you're going to see that by doing that, you're getting more color. So ink pads work the same way in a sense of whether they are an oxide or a regular distress ink. But the color, that's where things get really different. Now, the big thing of distress, and why distress is called distress, and why it was even developed in the first place, is because I wanted an ink that is reactive with water. And through the years, since 2004, people really use this reactive water term quite loosely, right? They're saying, oh, it's reactive with water, and that means that if you get it wet, it's going to move. Well, okay, that would be obvious. Anything water-based, when you wet it, it's going to react in some way. Watercolor, acrylic paint, anything like that. But when we talk about distress specifically being water reactive, that is when we wet it, and I'm just going to take water and spray this on, it's going to do what is called wicking. So do you see how the color wants to run away from itself? And the longer you let this sit here and just do its thing, that color is going to continue to wick. to push away from itself. That is the design of Distress. Most water-based dyes, when you wet them, they will push a little bit and stop. Distress, on the other hand, will continue to wick. That's its thing. And that's the cool thing about Distress ink, is that when you add that water, you get not only the intensity, you can see that this color actually became more vibrant, right? It didn't dilute like regular water-based dyes would. It actually becomes more intense because it is a true water reactive ink. Now, the same thing would hold true to oxide, but it's going to react in a different way. So when we wet this, we're going to get that wicking of the dye. You see that? That's what's wicking out. But we also get the intensity of the pigment. The pigment is not as reactive as the dyes, but what it's going to do is react slightly different because it's going to oxidize. That pigment, when it dries, is going to create kind of this almost hazy, chalky finish over the top. That is the quote oxidation, and why these are called an oxide, because these are not going to dry completely translucent like this. Now keep in mind, these are two totally different colors, so I don't want you to think like, oh wow, even the color's different. They really are. This is peeled paint, this is forest moss. But from a reactive property, that dye is going to react the same, because oxides are made up with distress ink, and then there is an additive in there to add the pigment, and then whatever the chemists do to make it oxidize, if you will. Now, of course, the longer it sits, now see how this just continues to wick, how I told you, that even though we rubbed that ink pad on the watercolor paper, you see how even that ink is just almost gone. You don't even see the ink pad mark, because Distress wants to continuously wick. That's its formulation, right? So if you let it air dry, you're definitely going to get more movement, more wicking. But you can also dry this, right? You can dry this with a heat tool at any time. Now, I prefer a Reinker's heat tool over an embossing gun when it comes to working with ink, because it's not going to blow anything around. You can see those water drips just stay exactly where they are. But I just want to show you some other ways that we can react and layer this ink. So I'm going to move over to my oxide. Now, do you have to heat dry it? No. But I like the fact that I can, because it's going to speed up the process of technique. And we'll talk about sealing and things like that a little bit later. Just want to get into kind of the basics. Okay. Now, when you add water over a dry surface, now this isn't crispy dry. This doesn't have to be, you can see there's a little still water drippage at the end. But now if I go in, I'm going to take my sprayer, and instead of just squeezing the trigger quickly to get that mist, I'm going to slowly squeeze this, and it's going to create droplets. See those drips on there, right? That's the cool thing about this Distress sprayer, is that by slowly squeezing the trigger, it's going to create drops. And if you don't want to do that, you can spray water in your hand and flick it over the top. Now, by doing this, what's happening is anytime water hits Distress ink, whether it's the first time, second time, third time, heat dry, air dry, indefinitely, it will always react the ink it touches. And what's happening under each of those drips is the ink under there is wicking. It's actually moving out to the shape of that droplet. It's pushing itself away. Now, if you let it dry, you're going to get these kind of lighter versions of this color. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'll just dry a little section over here, just so you can see what this is doing. There we go. Okay, so you see on this side, you see how those drips are outlined in that dark color? Why is that? Well, that's because the ink that was under that drip was pushing out to the side, and it stopped at the outline of that drip. That's the cool thing. But what about these? What about these that are still wet? Well, if you don't want to have these light drops and you want something a bit more intense, we can take something porous, right? That could be a paper towel. We can place this over the top of this, and when we lift this, it's going to lift off that color, right? So anytime that water is still wet and you pull it, it's going to lift the color directly off the surface. So you have that choice of whether you want to dry this. So this one, I'll just dry completely, or whether you want to lift it off. Totally up to you. And you don't have to use a heat tool. You can let it air dry, or you can just go in and let it do its thing. And you don't have to do splatters. Like sometimes if you're working on something larger and you want a bit more of, is everything cool? Okay. If you want something a little different, you have the option of creating different patterns, meaning it doesn't always have to be splatters. You can spray through a stencil. Let's say you had a flourish down there and it would give you that effect. You can have things drip. So that's fine as well, meaning I could take water and I could just do some drops, but then I can just stand up my card and let that water drip down. See that drippage? See that trail? It's going to do the same exact thing. The longer you leave the water on Distress Ink or Oxide, the more wicking it's going to do. So let me just finish drying this, just so you can see the difference. So if you want those intense outlines of color, then you want to make sure that you let the water sit there longer, because the longer it sits there, the more it's wicking that color that's underneath the drops. If you just want these to be kind of subtle, you know, maybe even almost a bokeh effect, if you will, on Distress, you can flick water and dab it off right away, and you don't get nearly the intense outline that you would get by letting this sit there. So there we go. This is one that was dry. So see how we still get those great undertones of the color, but you can clearly identify any of those water drips. And then here you can see that where it's white, that's where we lifted it off, but also we can see what's going on there. You see that? Ooh, that's good. I'll dry this one too. So this is just the basic, and we're going to get into other techniques that we can do with these inks and oxides, because what's important to understand is although they are very different, they're also really designed to work together. And if you have one or the other and you've not worked on combining the two, you're kind of really missing out, okay? Because the factors of the properties of both, that's the part that's, I think, most beneficial. So there we go. So you can see here on this peeled paint where I dried it, you see how it still kept the color because I didn't use the paper towel to lift off the color. So you have those options when you're working. Okay, let's get into some techniques. And sometimes I'll pull in the minis and sometimes I'll use the regulars. It really just depends on what my technique is and kind of what my mood is. Okay, so first thing we'll do, let's do just a background of oxide. I think I'll just take some of those. Oh, that'll be good. This is really going to be kind of a mucky background. I don't think I'll use forest moss for this. I'll go a little bit brighter. We'll do some evergreen bough, okay? And then I'm going to also just take some other colors of Distress Ink. I'm not going to do the same color because you've already seen a comparison. So what you need to do as a maker is choose what your jam is, right? What are you liking and why do you want it to be that way? Now, the other cool thing about Distress tins, if you have several of them, these are designed to stack, right? So they kind of, I'm not going to say they lock, but there's a little like lip in there where these stack up. So that makes it pretty nice. So before we get into some technique, we're just going to talk quickly about surfaces. Surfaces are really important. I could probably talk about surfaces for 2 hours, but I'm not going to. At the end of the day, it's all about you. It's what do you want to work with? What do you have available to you? And what do you prefer to use? So these are surfaces I prefer to use, which is why I added them to my line with Reinker. I found that when I was working with ink over the years, not all cardstock was created equal, although I thought it was. And I thought that anytime I took a class and the teacher said, oh, you need this paper, I'm like, right, you just want to sell it to me. I'm going to go to the office supply store or the dollar store or whatever. I'm going to buy my own paper. And that was fine. And then I learned about different things of paper and how different papers work different. And that kind of intrigued me to always try new surfaces, because you never know. You actually might find a paper at the dollar store that works magic with a certain art medium that you have. So at the same time, even if you have your favorites, if you ever see something new, don't be afraid to try it. You might discover something absolutely amazing. But in the distress world, here are the surfaces that I have in the line with Reinker, all right? So first is going to be Distress Watercolor cardstock. This is what I use most of the time when I'm doing wet techniques like watercolor or doing any kind of stamping, because it is a white watercolor paper. What I love about watercolor cardstock, it's 118 pounds, so it's a fairly heavyweight watercolor. But the nice thing about Distress watercolor is it is textured on one side and smooth on the other. Well, let me take out a sheet right here. There's a texture and there's smooth. And in the watercolor world, there's hot press and cold press. That's the difference. Hot press is going to be a smooth watercolor paper, and cold press is going to be lumpy bumpy. And I like the fact that Distress is either or. Both sides work the same in a sense that they both wick, they both blend, they both watercolor. But if you have the textured side, you're going to get more color that sits in those little divots, and that gives it to me a more textured or organic watercolor look. This side is a bit more of a smooth watercolor look, but again, depending on my stamped image, I may need that to get a nice crisp image, okay? The other things when it comes to textures, and I'll skip right over mixed media for now, is we have cracked leather and wood grain. Now these are just textured cardstocks. These cardstocks are a little thinner at 111 pound. They're nice for specific techniques when you want to create a wood grain or a leather effect, and we'll get into these a little bit more when we talk about sprays next week. Okay, they're pretty cool. And then we go into mixed media heavy stock. Now mixed media heavy stock is kind of an off-white color. It is a very interesting paper. This is the paper that's actually in the Dylusions journal, although her paper is a little bit thinner, and she allowed me to create heavy stock, so a thicker version of her paper. This comes in at about 110 pounds, so even thinner than the cracked leather and the wood grain, but it's very nice. It's really great. It comes in number 8 tags as well as 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. We also have it now in 8 1/2 by 11. It went away for quite some time because it didn't sell. But then Reinker brought it back. So thank you, Reinker, for bringing this back because it is a great paper, especially for doing a lot of die cut things. But you can see the color difference. It's not yellow like a manila tag. It's just slightly off-white, but it has some really great features when it comes to wet and dry. That's the whole mixed media property of this. It works really cool when you wet and dry, wet and dry, wet and dry. Okay? Now, in addition to the mixed media heavy stock, there are 2 new heavy stocks that we launched last year, I believe it is, and that would be white heavy stock and craft heavy stock. Now white and craft, these come in at 130 pounds. So these are thick suckers, and the great thing about a thick cardstock is it's great for card bases. I love using this craft as a card base, right? Because if you the ideology craft stock that we just did, that's only 100 pounds, so this is 130 pounds, so I love to use it as a foundation, as a base. But white heavy stock, man, this stuff is a dream. It has just a really crazy finish over the top. It is ultra smooth, so it works really great with Distress ink, for blending, for sprays, for so many different things, and it's very resilient to water as well because of that heavy weight of it. Now, if you're just looking into stamping and you're just a stamper and stamping is your thing, there's also a paper in the Distress line called Specialty Stamping. This is a matte coated paper. So this actually has a finish. Let me see if I have a piece. I'll take one out. Just show you the difference between that and glossy cardstock, right? So this is the Specialty Stamping. Now Specialty Stamping doesn't even have a weight marked on the package. I would say it's about 100-pound cardstock. And this is alcohol ink glossy. So you can see that this is glossy and this is a matte finish. Specialty Stamping is coated on both sides. Glossy is glossy on one, untreated on the other side. This is amazing for detailed stamping. It also does some really cool resist. So those are the surfaces. Now, if people say, is there a surface? What is the best surface to work on? The best surface to work on is the one that you'll actually work on, you know? The one that you want to use, the one that you like the effect. That's really what it is. You have to choose the surface that's going to be right for you. But I'll just give you a quick little comparison of stuff that I have done, just so you can see the difference in this. Now, these are all done with Distress ink, okay? One corner is blended with a blending tool and then flicked with water, and one is just by dipping into the ink repeatedly and letting it dry. So you need to look at the blendability and also the ability to layer and how it works. So this one is watercolor paper. Now, no surprise there. It works great with water. So you can see all that little flow. You can see the undertones as well as the deep dark tones. And you can see how that ink wicks and creates different layers. Blending, it blends nice, but as we do on this side, because it's textured, we see that texture. And you can see that when you splat it with water, it's actually very reactive. It wicks a little bit more because, well, it's watercolor paper, and watercolor paper is specifically designed for that effect. So look at that outlying ring. Okay, now these I just let it dry on the surface. I didn't blot it. So you're really getting that nice ring. Now this is mixed media. I'll just take one at a time. There we go. So this is mixed media heavy stock. So again, a little bit off-white when it comes to color, but this we can see layers really different. Okay, so instead of this getting soaked into the paper like watercolor, because that's what it's for, right? Watercolor we're designed to paint. Mixed media is designed for layering. So you can see when you layer that color, it really identifies each and every layer that you put on it. Okay, it creates some really nice splatters, some really nice watermarks. It blends really nice. There we go. You can see the blend. And when you wet it, it also wets really nice, but it doesn't give me that little jaggedy rippled edge like watercolor, right? Because it's just a different kind of paper. But for this technique, I love mixed media because I love the layer. The thing about mixed media heavy stock though is it is that off-white. So this is the new white heavy stock. Now white heavy stock does something completely different than this. So see how mixed media, a lot of that color soaks into the paper? Well, that's by design, right? Because again, this came out of Diane's journal. That was her journal paper. So when you're using sprays and things like that, she wants that color to absorb into that surface, right? So this paper, the reason I wanted to design this is one, I wanted a white surface. So if I use brighter colors, it would be true, meaning my pink wouldn't look peach because there was no yellow undertone. This is completely white. But at the same time, that smooth coating, I wanted this to really layer. So you can see every drip, every streak, every blob on this white versus mixed media where you can see that it blends in. And the technique is exactly the same. It's literally pressing, drying, pressing, drying, pressing, drying. But the white really shows every single layer. That is my jam. That is what I love. The other thing is about layering, right? When we're blending, this has the ability to layer color and create an easier gradation of color, simply because of that smooth coating, okay? Here I wanted to see how the color would just sit in the paper and it did really well. And here I was curious if it would actually give up color because it was so smooth, would it actually give some of that color? And it did. So this little part I just dabbed with a paper towel just because I wanted to see the difference. And again, I make these swatches just so I can see for myself. Now, this one really surprised me, and this is why I wanted to do a craft paper with Reinker. And when I was saying I wanted craft, Reinker's like, well, one, you have craft paper with ideology. And I'm like, yeah, but it's printed in color. It's a different animal. But two, I wanted a craft paper that is made out of that recycled fibrous paper, but would actually take ink. If you've ever tried to work on craft tags, in fact, Reinker used to have craft tags, the craft paper would become so rippled and suck up your ink that it just wasn't fun to use. And the paper would actually start to peel apart. This, remember, this is 130 pound, but look at how it layers the color. I mean, shut up. It's so cool. We can still see all the layers. Now, granted, it's not the same as white. I would say it's probably closer to mixed media in the sense of it's taking some of those background colors, but it still gives me the ability to layer. And that is what I love about craft. It's also a dream for oxide. And then you'll see both of the textured papers, right? Wood grain and cracked leather. Those two, these probably have a little bit more of a similar property to watercolor paper in a sense that they're just a bit more fluid. You don't see much of the outline like you would on watercolor paper. They blend really nice. The splatters, the spots, not nearly as defined as, say, the mixed media papers, because this paper is very porous. Like I said, similar to watercolor paper, it wants to absorb our color medium. And this is just good to do with any paper you get. Try to blend and try to wet. So like wet and dry technique. This way you can see what that is. And I keep these all the time just because I wanted to see. Now this one, if you haven't used this paper, you're kind of missing out on a whole different effect. This is Distress Specialty Stamping. This is that matte coated paper. Very slickery dickory. It's very smooth, but the cool thing about this is look at what it does with water. Okay, now this is Distress ink. It almost takes on a property of oxide because we're dealing with a coated paper that when we heat this layer, the inks actually kind of permeate the underneath surface. And I love the effect that this gives. It has much more of a fluid movement, as it should, because it's coated paper, right? So that fluid movement is going to really allow the ability to layer in a completely unique way, unlike uncoated cardstocks. And of course, blending, no surprise, it's going to blend like nobody's business because it's like a slip and slide. It just goes on there. But it is a matte coat, so your ink is going to grab onto the surface. Now this splattering water, when I tapped it with a paper towel, great for galaxy backgrounds. So if you're doing something with your Distress inks or your oxide and you want to create that really sharp, stark galaxy effect, there's nothing better than Distress Specialty Stamping because it's going to bring it right back down to the core because our core is coated, right? So there's a big difference between coated and uncoated papers and what you use and the effects, and having them just right in front of you visually, magic. So let's talk about the papers real quick, and then I'm going to go in to more demos. So here's some cool things about the paper. And again, a shout out to Reinker because, well, they listened to me and they listened to you, I will say, because as makers, once you find a cardstock that you like, at least for me, once I find a cardstock that I like, it is important for me to to always use what works for me, right? As much as I want to try other surfaces just to see if something's unique, I know that if I'm going to watercolor something, I've got my go-to watercolor cardstock or whatever that is, okay? So the packs, in the past, the papers have always been sold either in 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 pre-cut or 8 1/2 by 11. Now, like your pre-cut is going to give you usually double. So like mixed media, the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 is 20 sheets. The 8 1/2 by 11 is 10 sheets. But there's 3 papers that I have been using a lot, and I only asked for 3. So if you want more than 3, it's not going to happen because I only want 3. Okay? And that would be watercolor, because that's what I use a lot. White heavy stock, because again, that's what I use a lot for mixed media. And craft heavy stock, because that's what I use a lot for card bases. Now these papers, in addition to their 8 1/2 by 11 packs, right, on these heavy stocks, because these aren't sold in pre-cuts, these are just 8 1/2 by 11. Reinker added to their site that you can buy these in a 50 pack. So if you want 8 1/2 by 11 sheets as a 50 pack, you can buy it bulk in 50, and you can even buy it bulk in 200. Now, granted, 200 sheets of paper is going to run you well over $100, but if you're using that, it is a way more economical. I think it's, I don't even know, I don't know the math, but like 25% off of like if you were buying it by the sheet. So just something to think about, and that's on Reinker's site, but I just wanted to do a shout out to that because I know there's a lot of card makers out there that just wanted this paper in bulk, and it was nice of Reinker to bring in some of my favorites as a bulk option for makers. Okay, so moving on into backgrounds. So when I work with my ink pads, okay, first thing I'm going to talk about is just backgrounds and blending with them, because I think that's really important to just understand when you're working with it. I'm going to work with white heavy stock for this. And again, you could blend with whatever colors you want to blend with. Me personally, and I'll talk about this, and I don't know, maybe Ranger's going to sit back and cringe right now. The ink blending tool, right? This is me. This is my jam. As I mentioned, the blending tools have been out since the mini blending tool has been out since 2014, right? This little handle. And I love the flat foam. That is me. This is what I've used for my whole stamping career, if you will say. I like this flat foam. This is what I'm used to, that I can take this and let me grab a brown distress pad. All right, I'm gonna take this. Oh yeah. These guys, if you don't, this is called the ink stand. Her name is Brianne. She has an Etsy shop, and I think Jen Shirkus has talked about it, Jennifer McGuire's. It's a very cool thing. They manufacture these. They have magnets where you can put several together. I like it for the big one. I used to do the little shelf liner, which you could still do the shelf liner, but I think this is pretty slick that I have this and I've got my lid right there that I can just go in. Now, normally I'll just put it on this side. I still hold on to it because I still find like on glass that it's going to slip, but I keep it off of my table usually. I keep it right off of my media mat right there, and then I don't have to worry about it moving at all. But this is pretty cool because it gives us the ability to blend with ease. So let's just talk about the flat foam, and we're going to actually go into the domed foam. Okay. So when it comes to inking, this is what I would refer to as a heavy-handed inker. Okay. I'm pressing down, and when you're pressing down with that round foam, you're going to get these little scallops. Okay, because that's just the nature of that. You're going to get that because you're pressing down and you get that edge. The other thing to keep in mind is the surface that you work on. So I like to work on the glass part of the media mat versus a craft mat, because a craft mat has drag, right? It kind of drags onto the edge of my blending foam. But what I do is I'll hold this, right? It's the whole ergonomic thing. I like that it's narrower down there. And I'm going to hold my blending tool at just a slight angle, just so that edge is not sitting on the paper. And then I'm just going to start with very, very light-handed circular motion. Really light-handed. And that's the thing. I think most people, when they go to blend, they want that intense look like I did initially, right? And so just by kind of light-handed swirling motion, this foam has kind of seen its better day right now. I see that it's starting to disintegrate. All right. The lighter you are, the easier the blend. And you can continue to increase the kind of the size of your circles just as that ink starts to kind of go into the paper, right? So there's the difference, right? You can still get a really nice smooth blend as long as you're not pressing down with this tool. But of course, as things progress in our industry, you know, there's different ways to do things. So these are the domed foams that Reinker has. Now, Reinker's not the first one to have domed foams. There's actually a few companies now in the industry that have a domed foam. But the great thing, of course, it does fit this mini blending tool, or mini blending tool. It's got a little bit of kind of EVA foam, like fun foam down here, that gives it a little cushion, and then it's got this dome, and this dome is very pillowy. This is great for people that, when it comes to blending, are a little just blend challenged, if you will, and that's not a bad term at all. That's just saying that no matter how many times you try, you're just very heavy-handed to get color down, and that's okay. That's totally fine when it comes to working with that if you're heavy-handed. The dome allows me to go right onto the surface, and I don't have to worry about any marks, right? And that's just going right in there. The other nice thing though about this foam is really going to be very absorbent, if you will. It will hold on to a lot of color. It is designed, like our blending foam, to transfer ink from the pad to the surface. So I like the amount of color that this will hold, because this is going to give me that same ability to get a lot of color on my surface versus a blending brush. Blending brushes are also nice. People that love them, love them. I'm not a fan of them simply because they don't hold enough colorant for me to transfer. I feel like with a brush, I kept going back and going back and going back, dipping color. And that's really what the dome foam kind of did. It just really allowed, I saw that, Roseanne. That really allows me to just go in. And now, of course, if you start in the middle of your paper and you try to blend that out, well, that's on you, right? Because you still can't just press that down on the paper like a stamp. But you don't have to worry so much about how much pressure you apply or going from an angle. So it's really up to you. These are great for stencils. I'll admit, I love it with a stencil because that dome does get into the little grooves of the stencil. And I use the dome foams for simple things if I'm just going to do like a very soft blend around the edge. But I would still say that for, you know, most of my blend work, I kind of go to these flat foams. Now, when it comes to the flat foams, here's some things that you need to understand as well. This is what I work with in my studio. It's usually off camera. This is a vintage cast iron spinner that Mario got me years ago. The top row has blending tool for pink, red, orange, yellow, green, teal, blue, purple, brown, and black, okay? There's enough spacers for all those tools. And the bottom are the same color order, but for oxide. So I have a layer for ink foams and oxide foams. That's what I work with 90% of the time because I can use any pink with the pink foam. But at the same time, for the minis, I do have a dedicated foam for every color that sits under there. Now these are the flat foams because the dome foams do not fit underneath that mini ink pad, just the flat foam. And I have those in here. And this is really good that if I'm doing a project and let's say I want color specific, okay, that I can go in and I know that I can pull out my minis because let's say I'm going to do something for winter and I want to make sure that I only do speckled egg and weathered wood and ice spruce and I don't want to mix them up because I want those three tones. Well, then I'll use my minis for that because I know that each color is going to have a dedicated foam. And to do that, I could just take a regular handle. I've got my ink pad. I always leave the black side out, that fabric side, that I can just touch that blending tool in there and go to town with the color, right? Then you can just peel this off and it can go right back into its case. So again, just depends on what you're doing and how you're working with color. The other way that we can apply inks is a blending brush. Now, I like blending brushes simply because I like how they work differently than a smooth edge. Sometimes I want to blend something that is a bit more distressed, if you will, okay? I love the distress factor. Now I just color the ring with a Sharpie, right? So the blending brushes, they just come 2 in a pack. They fit in the mini tin, okay? It is a natural bristle. It's not synthetic like a cosmetic brush. It's a natural bristle instead. It is kind of domed at the top, so you can see that. It has this little guard that can slide up to cover the bristles, and you put the cap on with those 2 little bumps. But here's what's cool about this, okay? I can pick up color on my brush, and I can go right on my surface anywhere I want and add color, okay? And the cool thing about this is it gives it a totally different texture. And you can see I'm being well, fairly aggressive. I'm kind of mopping that color on there. I'm not really worrying about anything because the blending brush is not going to create lines in any way. Okay, and again, this is with ink, and I'll show you the same with oxide. Now, let's say I wanted to get a little bit more intense color. The beauty of this is I can slide this color up, which makes those bristles more compact, and that will allow me to actually focus color in an area. Now, this is designed for a much softer application of color. This is designed to apply less ink than a blending tool will. So sometimes, as I mentioned, I'm doing a project where I just want to add a tint of distress. I don't want to make it look like it's been dipped in mud, and I also don't want to make it look like a box of Lucky Charms with so many colors, right? So if you want a subtle amount of color, that again is what brushes are designed to do, and I reference that with the cosmetic brushes. Also great for stencils, and I'm not sure if we're going to get to stencils today for blending, but this is my favorite thing for stencils because I can really focus where I get the color. So let's say I wanted to go in with oxide and ink. Do you need a set for inks and oxides? Well, I don't think you do, okay? But if you're constantly going back and forth and you don't want to clean your brush in between, well, then the answer is, of course you do, because, well, that's just what you're doing, all right? So let's just take a brush, and I'm going to go into oxide. This happens to be Evergreen Bow, and I'm going to use my green brush, and I'm going to pick this up. And I'll just share with you how I do my brushes, right? So here I'm just going to go in, blend that out. And oxide's very, very creamy in this sense. That's going to allow me to really create kind of a nice, creamy blend of this. And you can see just on the media mat the opacity of that. In fact, I'll even go to some craft. We'll just do the same thing, because this is just going to be a very soft blend on craft. And that's what I like about different tools for different jobs, right? So now I've got oxide on here. Before I put this away, like when I'm done, I'm going to clean off my brush. And this is how easy it is to clean off your brush. You're going to take a baby wipe, a paper towel, something slightly wet, and you're simply going to brush off that pigment. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. Swipe that and you're done. It's clean. You do not have to rinse this. You do not have to soak it. All we've done is we've wiped off the pigment from this brush. So now we can close it. So this way I know that anytime I use these, I can always use these with either ink pad because they're always clean. Whereas if I left oxide on here and I happen to go into an ink pad, that would be bad because you would transfer pigment to the surface of an ink pad, and that's not a good idea. If you don't want to worry about it, well, then have two sets and mark which is which, right? But that's the easiest way to just simply clean off your brushes. For your foam, I don't clean off the foams. You can clean them, you can wash them and wring them out and do all that, but I don't clean them in between inks. That's why I have dedicated foams for oxide and distress. So that's the blending part of it. So far, so good? Okay, let's hope so. So now we're going to get into just kind of fun backgrounds. When it comes to creating backgrounds, you got something? No? Okay.
You just created a spinner frenzy.
Oh, it's not happening. Reinker had a spinner for many years and it's here and gone. So this would be about like eBay, Etsy, antique shops. But yeah, Reinker used to do a spinner and then they got out of it because, well, as with most things, when it stops selling, they can't keep it forever. And that doesn't mean it gets to come back, does it?
Yeah, you just need to look at antique stores.
That's it. Yeah. So when it comes to layering, I love to layer on my craft mat by pressing down my ink pads to add color. And I'm just going to do this quick demo. I demo it really every time I go to a show just to show people the difference. And I'm working with ink and oxide on this. And you're going to see that obviously when you work with oxide on a glass mat, it really shows up because you have that black core down there, that black glass that's really shining through. Let's do a little bit of kitsch and we'll do kitsch. So I'm just doing the same colors over here, just kind of a warm background, just so you can see the difference, okay? Now we're just going to add some water. Spray, 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 spray both. Now when we spray, what we're doing is we're reacting the color and we want to create water droplets. Can you see those little drops right there? That's super important. I don't have any rings on. I can see my fingers are just weird. They drive me crazy.
There they are.
Oh, I need them. Sorry guys, it's not a vanity thing. It's just when I see my fingers on camera, I always say I have pork chop fingers, and this just kind of breaks it away from me. Okay, back to it. So you'll notice here that the inks remain where they are on this craft mat. And this is that removable mat that comes with a media mat. Silicone back, but you can see that the color stays on this surface, okay? The glass, if you can see, my colors immediately migrate. As soon as water hits these inks on a glass surface, it's going to wick out across the area. And that is why when I work with this technique, I prefer to work here, because when I go in and print, I'm able to print, but my colors maintain their integrity, their area. If I go in and print here, my colors, as soon as I lift up, you see how they just muddy together? And so that's the difference. Could you get a good blend maybe your first swipe? Yep, possibly. But this also creates these little dots. And when we're layering color and we're creating all those little nuggets of goodness, like I showed you in the samples, all these little drips, okay? These are all done from these drips right here. And so that is why in order to get this effect, you need to work on a surface like this. If you only work on glass, it's just always going to be a smooth, blended, and sometimes a muddy mess depending on the colors that you're working with, right? So let's just start this over. I'm gonna work strictly here. I just wanted to do this just for the sake of the demo to see the difference of color migration and leaving the color where they need to be. All right, let me get my inky. So remember when you're working on this, you start on and you finish off, and that's what's going to keep your mat from curling on the surface. If it curls, well, one, you could take it off, clean it, and probably put it under some books until it flattens out again. But just try not to go from the glass onto the mat, because you will get ink that sits under here and it'll start to curl the edge. All right, let me clean this off, but you can always get a replacement one of these. It's funny, I don't even know how much a replacement is. Was it like $6 or something? It's like, yeah, it's like the price of a coffee. So I don't understand the, you know, if you need a replacement, you get one. Okay, let's go. We're gonna work strictly on our mat and we're gonna start creating some background. So I'm just pressing some color down, a little evergreen bough. This is going to be some frayed burlap. Now, do I keep oxides and ink separate? Not necessarily, but I try not to overlap. I try not to swipe a color through a color. You want to avoid that if you can. If you happen to touch one over the other, it's not a big deal. You just try to avoid it, okay? Because you will contaminate your ink pads over time if you mix your oxides and your distress inks. Okay, there we go. Just press down a bunch of colors. This is good, this is good, this is good. Just throw in a little bit of walnut stain here as well. Here's the other thing I like. I love that this really is my palette, so to speak. So here we're going to spray it. So watch the difference between these colors and when we go in and spray water. So did you hear how much water was down there? You want to see droplets, right? There's no magic spray of, oh, it's just one spritz or two, or you really want to see droplets of color to do the technique. So here we go. Well, there's Brienne, she's in here. All right, so here we're gonna take our paper. Now this is the mixed media heavy stock, just because that's the one I wanted to choose. This is the, oh sorry, not mixed media, this is white. I'm gonna go in and I'm going to make a print. I'm going to lift, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, all right? When it comes to layering ink, if you go in and keep dipping into this color, you're going to create mud, because wet on wet blends, wet on dry layers. So let's say you have a print like this. Now I'll tell you some things that I like and I don't like about it. I love this. I love how those colors started to migrate together. That little bit of campfire, a little bit of frayed burlap. But this part, I don't like. I don't like the fact that it looks kind of speckly. Remember, this ink is reactive with water. So I could just go in and just hit it with a little water. That's going to get that to kind of move. And then we're going to dry it. And we need to dry layers. Really, really important. Now, if you're one of those people that every time you try to layer color, you're getting mud, it's simple. It's just the fact that you're not drying in between. That's it. You're just not drying it. And when I say dry it, I don't mean crispy dry. I just mean you have to look at the surface, and when you see that the surface is no longer shiny with water, then it's dry enough, okay? Now let's look at our background at this stage. So here we've got ink that's sitting on the edge. So if I want to bring color in, I can tip this and bring that color right in and dry it, or I can lift it off. So for right now, I just want the intensity. So I'm just going to go in and dry that in there. Okay. Now, if you didn't want it, it's really simple to kind of work in layers. So here are your options. The beginning of the video, when I was talking about lifting water, I talked about a paper towel. If you are a chronic paper towel user, where every time you use it, you're going to work on a paper towel, it's always going to lift all the color that's on your surface. If you can find some sort of towel or cloth or something that you like to work with. These are flour sack towels. I get these from Walmart. I know if you don't have that access to that, I know Simon Says even offers these. I love the fact that a flour sack towel doesn't have any lint like a terry cloth towel would have, and it's not super absorbent. So it's going to allow me to just dab off a lot of that moisture, but it's not going to bring me down to a white core of my paper. And I just kind of refer to this as my inky binky. I use that all the time for inks, and I'll use it until there's no more white space, but I use it really for inks, paints, glues, anything. So now it's time to layer. So now we're going to go in and we're just going to start splashing in here. So remember, my first thing was a print. I said we print color, and now it's about splashing in the color, and you're going to flip it over and you get what you get. We're going to dry. Now we're starting to see little action, right? We're starting to see those little drips. And the only way to achieve something that looks layered is to layer. There you go. And you'll see here that by combining oxide and ink in my palette, I'm getting vibrant colors, and I'm also starting to get this beautiful, dreamy, hazy look of oxides. So using them together, and I'm saying this because if you are a maker and you've only used oxide or you only used ink, you'll know that if you only stick with oxide, your backgrounds are very pastel, very pale, because all you're seeing is pigment. And if you're doing Distress Ink, they're very vivid, they're very vibrant, because you're only dealing with a dye. So the whole purpose of today is to remind you about using both to create really cool layers that have not only the vibrant tones, but that are also going to have this oxidation over the top. And you can see I'm still just playing around in here. Now let's say there was a color here that you didn't have, or let's say there was a color here that you wanted, but for some reason, wherever you put it, it was overpowered, right? So I know that I put down a little bit of Kitsch Flamingo down here, and clearly that pink has just been overtaken by the beauty of the orange tones in here. Okay, we can still go back and add color. So let's talk about how we do that and where we do that. So here, so far, layer 3, and you could stop at any point. You can stop with the white space. I'll talk about how we can blend out some of that white space, but let's say we wanted to add some color in here. Let's see, what do I have? Let's go down into oxides. Perfect. We're going to take a little picked raspberry. That's really going to juice it up. So before I apply it to the palette, I need a landing area. I need a place that I can put this. So all I'm going to do is just take my Inky Binky, and I'm just going to clean out an area. I don't want to necessarily wipe everything off because I still might get some cool drips in there, and I'm just going to press down some of that color, and I'm pressing, right? Just like I showed you on the paper at the very beginning of the demo. You have to press down to get color out. Then we don't want to forget the water. Ooh, look at that. And then we're going to start to put this into our background. But here's the thing. The challenge that most people would have is that at this point they're adding a new color. You're going to want to dip into that color. What's going to happen if you do? We're going to have a nice big pink spot, diamond, whatever shape you want to call this, because that's how it is on your palette. So what I want to do is I want to integrate this color into my palette. There you go. Just with my fingertips, I can wipe them right off onto a baby wipe or something. And now I've got color that when I go in and splash, I'm going to get that same ability to put color around my background and not just in one area. So anytime you go in and you add layers or colors, keep that in mind, that if you don't want it to overpower your background, move it around in your palette. And at some point, if you look at your palette and you don't remember what's what, well, then it's time to just clean up and add some more color on there. But here's the beauty of adding oxide, right? The oxide, because it's dye and pigment, is going to give it the unique ability to sit on top of whatever we put it on. And I'll show you exactly what I mean in just a second as it's dry. I'll bring this up to the camera so you can see it, okay? The beauty of this, because this was an oxide, is that wherever it sat, whether that's over the blue or the dark blue or the yellow or the orange, it's still pink. Why? Because it is a dye and a pigment. Remember I said pigment is opaque. Opaque you cannot see through. So by having that fusion of dye and pigment, we're getting the blend of a dye. You can see how that picked raspberry just kind of blends into the color, but we're also getting the opacity of a pigment. And that's what makes oxide so fun to layer. So by using both, Distress Ink and Oxide, we're getting just some really cool movement. Now this time I'm actually pressing a little bit harder on this layer because I want bigger splotches. Okay, the harder you press, the bigger that blob is going to go. And what I do when it comes to this particular look is, like, you see that really dark spot right there from the blue? There we go. Okay. If I don't like it, just touch it, right? That's the beauty of having this too. This is kind of your editor, your creative editor, that when you see something, if it looks dark, it's going to dry dark. If it looks like mud, it's going to dry like mud. If it looks too bright, it's going to dry too bright. So when you're seeing it on the paper as you're drawing a layer, if you don't like something, just dab it off with this, and it's not going to pull everything underneath it, right? Look at that. Beautiful, beautiful background. Now here's the thing to understand about backgrounds. Once you're happy with it, step away from the background. Just be done, right? Clean this up. Some people would want to use all this. They might dip a journal page or something in there. That's fine. You do you, okay? You can clean up however you wish. But if you like a background, you should be done with it. But let's say this is a background that I like, but it's not 100%. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to just finish drying this. And we'll talk a little bit about backgrounds, and depending on what you do, if you are a card maker or if you are a mixed media artist, or maybe you like to create backgrounds, or maybe you want to do this like on envelopes, because there's a lot of people doing great envelope art now. Okay, so let's say you were doing something with your paper and you don't like the fact that it has a curve. Well, first of all, paper doesn't have a memory, right? So you could go in with your hands and you could just bend it the opposite way. It'll take a bit, but you can get it to actually relax back to normal. However, if you own a Mink or any kind of a laminator that has a carrier sheet, a plain carrier sheet, I happen to use Heidi Swapp Mink because that is my favorite. I love the Mink Mini. You simply put your backgrounds into a carrier sheet, you run it through your Mink, and it will bring it out completely flat. So whether that's an envelope, whether that's a card, whether that's a tag, you can put it through your Mink on its highest setting, and that's going to flatten your paper. You don't need to spray it first. You don't need to do anything. The heat and the pressure will make it completely flat. So that's just a tip if you are doing a lot of backgrounds and you want them to be flat. Maybe it's an ATC that you don't want it to be kind of bendy. These I don't mind because I never know what I'm going to do with the background, right? Maybe I'm going to go in and use it with my die cuts. Maybe I'm going to emboss it. Who knows? So I don't flatten everything out as soon as I make it, right? I just do it if I need to, but there's a tip. So let's talk about this background. I love the way it looks, but I really wish that the teal was a little bit more intense in certain areas. I don't mind the white space, but I want some more of that color. Now, if I were to go in and keep trying to layer that teal, chances are it would really muck up my background because it would just make everything down there a bit muddy. So let's go into our Distress Ink. We're going to use peacock feathers for this, and I'll just use that just to actually create a little bit of color on here. And we can use whatever tool it is that we want to work with. For this, because I'm going to just jump into a color, I'm just going to put on a dome foam, put that on there. And here's what we're going to do. We're just going to go in and highlight some of that area. Okay? And I'm just going to kind of move it around. You can kind of hear it kind of squeaking around. Just bring in some of that color. There we go. And I'll put some up here. This is the benefit of this, is because I don't have to start from the edge like I would with a flat foam. So that's what I was saying. Different tools for different things, depending on what you want to do. But see, I was able to just kind of introduce that color. But let me talk about this. Now that I've introduced that color, I don't like the fact that you can tell that it's not drippy moving around. So what do we do to get a water reactive look? Well, we add water to it. So I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to create those drips. Again, just by dripping the water on there. That's going to give it time to react. Again, just like at the very beginning. See how that water is just reacting? But now it broke up that blended layer. It made it so it just doesn't look perfect. It's got just, again, those imperfections. Now, as the maker, what do you want to do? Do you want to dry it or do you want to lift it off? Ooh, I don't really know. Okay, for this one, I'm just going to go in and just dry it because I don't want to create true white space. I don't mind having a little bit lighter, but I also love, you'll see that where the water hits everything else, that created this incredible background. Why does it look so incredible? Well, to me, because we use a combination of oxide and ink, right? So by using oxide and ink, and it's not totally dry there. I'm not going to worry about it. It can air dry the rest of the way. But that's what's giving us these vivid undertones, but also that wonderful kind of milky, almost like a patina look. And that's because of the power of an oxide. Okay, really nice. So let's keep going with another background. All right, we're gonna do that again. So we're gonna take, this one happens to be an ink, and again, I'm pressing down. I'll go in with a little bit of frayed burlap that's here. I chose some really nice intense colors. Here's a little chip sapphire, right? Now, just because you have an entire ink pad certainly doesn't mean you have to use all of it, right? I think I'll even throw in a little bit of purple, little seedless preserves. Just moving that off to the side. And let's go into oxide. Ooh, this is a yummer. This is crushed olive. Crushed olive oxide. It's got just quite a bit of yellow in there. It's my jam. And we're gonna throw in a little bit of cracked pistachio. So there's a lot of greens going on here. That's okay. And then I will throw in a little ground espresso as well. Not some oxide. And I'll put that here and here. There we go. Just a totally different palette. It's a bit on the grungier side, just to show that we could definitely do that. Water. There we are. And this time we're just going to do something, I'm going to do a different kind of background. So this one we did, this was that white heavy stock. So very smooth, very kind of creamy, dreamy. This one I'll do, well, let's do watercolor. Okay. Now here's another thing about watercolor paper. Remember how I mentioned how porous this is? If you want your backgrounds to just be a little bit more blendy, just start with a little water on the surface. Water on the surface of your paper is going to make this first print, you'll see, just more fluid from the go. Why? Because unlike this where we started with dry paper, adding just a little bit of water, I didn't hose it down, just a little water, it just made every single edge just seamless, right? Just kind of wicked right into the paper, and we're going to go in and just start drying it. Again, your option, right? Your creative option of whatever you want to do. Okay. A Tim color palette combo sheet. Well, I wish, but I don't even think about it. Really, I think I could probably be on like a creative episode of Iron Chef where you can throw any colors at me and I like to mix them together, because the whole thing about Distress palette, I like to challenge myself on colors I don't normally work with, because I think that provides something a little more interesting. Okay, so same rules are going to apply on this. And let me talk about this particular one, because I chose a lot of greens and browns, a lot of the same colors, just so you understand how you can bring a background back. Okay, because sometimes you're just going to pick colors. I mean, that was a really good segue. Sometimes you can just choose colors that you think are going to be great, but they just choose to not have enough contrast for you. And that's okay. We can still go in and fix this up. All right, I'm going to keep going in, adding a few layers. There's some of that. And each time I'm just splashing and splattering. All right, so at this point, I like it. I love that little splash of purple, right? A little unpredictability. But I'm just seeing a lot of the same colors. My greens and browns have kind of just not really worked out. They've just kind of migrated together. And of course, well, that's what was bound to happen. There's nothing else that we could do about it. But here's what we can do to layer onto this background. Now you can see on this particular background, I used quite a few oxides, right? Frayed burlap and ground espresso, and just working with those colors. The oxides are really the ones that are creating this beautiful kind of smooth blend. See that white oxidation we're starting to get? The more you add layers of oxide, the more they will start to kind of turn that oxidized finish. But it doesn't mean that we can't go back and add color. And here's where we're going to just really punch this up. I'll take some Salty Ocean. We're going to throw that in. I'm going to throw even a little bit of fossilized amber down here. If we want a little bit more of that purple, I'll just do a little seedless preserves. I only use a little purple at a time because I think sometimes you can get a little too much. And then good old standby. We're going to take some walnut stain and we're going to add water to this. Okay, now I've got this background. So am I going to press into that? Nope, don't want to do that. So what I want to do instead is I want to break this up, okay? And this is all about you learning to play, try new things, right? You know, don't be this little judgy McJudge that's like, oh no, this is too much this or this is that. You need to just play around, right? Everyone's going to have different likes and tastes. But I think the biggest critic is kind of ourselves, in how we want to create things or how we think things should look. I think the more you give yourself that creative playtime, you might discover, I don't know, maybe something different, maybe something exciting in your own little creative world. Okay. Nice. And we're just going to keep layering this. Okay. So I want to get this to move around a little bit. So here's where I'm just going to add some water drops just to get that to kind of move. There we go. If I want to fill up this white space, you see that white space here? I can just add some water and that's going to pull that color in that direction. Nice. Good deal. Okay. I'm done with this layer. Again, having this by your side is going to be your friend. It's just right there. Okay. Now look at how this water really has changed this background. It's taken those things that really appeared to be super layered, but gave it a really nice, beautiful, kind of harmonious look. I love this background. This would be great for botanicals, great for like wildflowers over the top of it, just something like that. That's what I'm feeling. Very kind of nature palette. But because it has some of that oxide in there, it's really creating a beautiful effect. You see that cream that we're getting, but you see that vivid look of where we use distress. Once you start using both, you're going to be able to quickly identify the difference, really. You're going to be able to know from a background that you've done, like, okay, that was oxide, that was ink. So now I'm going to go in with some oxide. Again, I'm just going to break this up. It's one color. That's all I want to do for this one. And I'm just going to splash some of this on. This happens to be Evergreen Bough, just because I want to put a little bit of that kind of green, creamy haze over the top of that one. Wipe that off. I'm multitasking over here. I got tins everywhere. All right, we're going to throw in a little brighter color too. Let's do a little Mermaid Lagoon in an oxide. That's what I love about working with ink. Seriously, if you just play around, you'll amaze yourself. Okay. There we go. We're going to dry this. So this Mermaid Lagoon is definitely much bluer, but it's going to give it a beautiful turquoise feel over the top. Okay. I agree, Kim. See, it can go from something that's just not your jam to going. You can bring backgrounds back. It's just about throwing on something that's completely different than what you're using, right? So I identified that as like, whoa, that's a lot of green or a lot of yellow going on. But see, by adding this oxide, so now look at what that did. See, look at that beautiful green and kind of turquoise that went over the top. That helped kind of neutralize that background. I still kept that purple in there because I really liked that look or that effect. So now we'll just add some tones to it. So we will go in with our ink pad. I'll pop this one off. And I'll go in with this one. Actually, I'm just going to use my spinner. Y'all don't mind. All right. Okay, so here I'm just going to go with my blending tool. And I'm just blending here and there. Okay, I'm not creating a perfect frame or an edge, but I needed to add a little grunge because that's to my liking, a little grunge. But I can also add a few other tones. So I'm just going to grab a little blue. And just punch up blue in certain areas, just wherever I want to see it. Okay, and then just like before, I'm going to go over it with just a little bit of water, just to kind of break some of that up. And let's see what we get. Because I think by adding some shadow, and whether that is grunge, if grunge is not your jam, even if that's purple or something else, adding color to some of the edges, it helps bring your eye back into the center of what you just did. And I just wanted to show the two different backgrounds because technically we use the same ink types, but we're able to get different effects. One, because of the paper type. So this one is watercolor, so you can see that texture coming through. And this one is the white heavy stock. Again, you can see that. See how all of my drips, they have much more of a flow, a wicking because of the watercolor paper. And see how here my drips are much more outlined, much more defined. So that's really the difference just in paper type, right? But also this really wants to make your colors flow and blend because they're watercolor, and this holds on to your color better because of heavy stock. So that's just what I love. All right, so now let's get into some other things. Let's get into things like, what do we do if we're working with our background and we want to create some different effects? Maybe we want to seal it, or maybe we want to add some elements to it. Let's just talk about the basics of a product called Distress Microglaze. Distress Microglaze, this is a product that it's actually been in the industry for many years. It's an original product from a company called Judikins, and they actually fill it for Reinker because it was their formulation, and I love it all the time. But even years ago when I would tell people about it, they'd be like, oh, I don't think you can seal Distress. And so we asked them, hey, would you collaborate with us and fill it and put it in line? So they still do their version, this version. It's the same stuff, but now it just kind of makes sense for people that, yes, you can use it with your Distress products. Now, the cool thing about Distress Microglaze, it's kind of this, I don't know, it's almost this waxy kind of stuff, but it will seal your Distress inks or oxides, right? It will do either one. So let's just talk about stamped image. Let me grab that. I'll just take a little butterfly. There we go. Doing all right, Mario?
Great.
Okay. I see him busy over there, so whenever I see him like super busy, it's like kind of, can you do me a favor?
Sure.
Can you hand me that platform right there? It's on the table. Yep. And that block. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Cool. I was doing a little stamping earlier and I left my platform over there. All right. So let's do a little stamping. Okay. Just going to work with this. This one I'll just work on mixed media. Again, it doesn't necessarily matter the paper that you want to work on. Okay, but I'll just do just a couple different ones. So let's take, oh my gosh, I have no space no matter what I do. I like that. Okay, I'm going to do a little vintage photo. It's a classic. All right. Tap, 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 because that's how we ink up a stamp, right? Tap, 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 tap. And we're going to stamp that. Do it again. Tap, 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 tap. And we're going to stamp that. Okay. Now both of these have been stamped. Okay. Now Distress ink, because it's designed to blend and move and all that. And by the way, when I clean off my stamp, it's just water and my towel. That's all I use. Clean off Distress because it is water reactive. All right. We're going to just dry this. Now, I'm not drying it to heat set it by any means. I'm just drying it to dry it because the ink is going to take a minute to dry. Right? That's the whole thing with Distress. So before you seal something with microglaze, it needs to be dry. Again, not heat set. It could sit off to the side for a few minutes or whatever. All right. Next, you're going to take this and you're going to use your finger. Now, if you don't want to use your finger, you could use a blending foam, or you could have some type of dedicated tool for this. That's fine. It doesn't bother me on my fingers, but I know it bothers some people. Okay. I'm just using a very small amount. I literally just touch that, and I'm just going to go in, try to find just a clean finger, and I'm just rubbing this in to the paper. That's all I'm doing. Okay. Just want to make sure that it's into the paper, and that's really why I prefer to use my fingers, because if you don't, well, then you can't really tell that you're rubbing that into the paper. Once that's in the paper, you're just going to take something dry. In this case, it is a paper towel. I don't tend to go to the binky for that. I just go in and I'm just going to buff off any excess microglaze. It doesn't remove anything. There's nothing visible there. It just makes sure that if there's any additional microglaze over the top, you want to get rid of that, okay? Because can you use microglaze on metal? You cannot. It's for porous surfaces, so you can use it for papers. That is it. So now we have this on the card, and we've got both images, and you can see that the microglaze really doesn't change it. Right now, it hasn't evaporated, because the thing about microglaze, it actually evaporates. What's weird is, when I first use it, I'm like, oh, it kind of feels like Carmex or petroleum jelly. Oh, I'm sure that's the same stuff. It isn't. It actually has some type of something in it that makes it evaporate. So that color, that like where the paper seems a little wet, is going to dissipate. It's going to be exactly the same as this when it's completely dry. Okay. But here's the cool thing about microglaze. If I go in and I spray this butterfly with water, you can see that the water just beads up on the paper, right? But the paper is not shiny, right? It's not like a waxed card, but it beads up. The one that I did not seal, it's going to wick. Now, that's also very cool, right? With a stamped image, you can just let it do its thing. We can dry it and we can create a whole different wicking vibe with this. Right, look at this. It's very cool sometimes to do with images, is just stamp them and spritz them and then dry them, and like, there you go. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Look at that. So see, sometimes like stamping this in a journal or on something, it just really makes that image kind of look tea stained, because remember, it is reactive with water. So all that reaction happened from spraying water. That's true reactive. You get that really cool effect. Okay, but let's go back to this guy. Let's say I'm working in a journal. Let's say I wanted to put something over the top of this. Okay, I wanted to add a color. I wanted to do some blending, and I don't like the fact that it is sealed. Okay, here's the cool thing about Microglaze. I'm going to see if I can just fake this without cooking my hand. Let's try another piece. This may or may not work this way, but I'm going to try it. So I'm going to block off just this part, and I'm going to heat up this side. Okay. There we go. So I applied heat maybe to half. It may have gone through the whole thing, but you may or may not get the gist of this in just a minute. All right, I'm going to put down a little bit of ink real quick. We'll spray it with some water, because this could be a spray stain. This could be anything that you're going to put over the top. So I'm going to take that butterfly and I'm just going to drag through that ink. All right. Now we're going to go in and we're going to dry it. All right. You'll see it. It's very subtle because I didn't want to cook myself, but you'll get the idea. Well, now the whole thing is going to do it, so that you'll understand. You'll understand this. Okay. If you look at the butterfly now, can you see this side how it's got some blue? Okay. This side has no blue, right? Because the microglaze just repelled all the ink, but here you can actually see the color coming through. Now I'm just going to cook the whole thing. If you heat microglaze, you will be able to work over the top of it. So again, I'm layering this, and now I want to add color over to the top of this butterfly. So I can take any of my inks. I'll do some more blue on here. Now that I've just cooked the whole thing, you'll be able to totally get it. And I will be able to layer color now, but my butterfly will never smear. It's sealed. Think of it like Photoshop, if you do Photoshop. That layer is sealed. So if you don't heat microglaze, it will repel anything fluid. If you heat microglaze, it will now become a workable layer, meaning you can add stuff to the top of it, but you're not going to impact the layer below it. Now, ultimately, it's still paper. So if you hose this down, and I want to show you, so there's our layered butterfly. But let's just take a look at this wing. Let's see if I can get this to happen, because some people do. Like, they'll take their image and they'll do this. I'm really trying to get it to smear, and now it's not going to smear. But I'm going to let it sit there for just a minute, right? It's going to still be sealed. Oh, I can't even get it to wick a little bit. But my point being is that if you put so much water into your paper that your paper itself absorbs, it could actually push your image out from underneath the microglaze, if that makes sense. It still didn't really do a big smear, but you get the idea that if you still overjuice your background, you know, microglaze is only sealing the surface. So chances are you probably wouldn't be adding that much stuff to it. But I'm going to go back and just add another layer because I can. Because I love this ability of microglaze. A lot of people just don't understand that if you don't heat it, it's sealed, it's done. You know, so let's say you wanted to write over the top of it. Let's say you wanted to stamp something over the top of it, text or whatever. In order to put something over microglaze, you would just need to heat it, and it's still not going to affect what you put that layer underneath it. But to me, like, both are very cool. Like, I love the idea of heating that, but I also just love the idea of stamping and spraying, just something different. And that's what this demo is all about, just playing around with mediums. So let's work with microglaze as a technique. Like, once you understand the basics, let's use it as a technique. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of oxide, and we'll take a little cracked pistachio. There's some very cool things that I've done with microglaze and gloss paper and all sorts of stuff. I'm not going to do that today, but there's a lot of fun things that I've done. There's a lot of interesting effects that we can get. Just throwing color down right now, just to put this into play. Again, we'll do a little bit of salty. Okay. Spray, spray, spray. Droplets. Good to go. And we're going to get into sprays next week, and you're going to see about backgrounds of how maybe you want to work with, something like this. Actually, let's do a tag right now. Maybe sometimes you want to work on a background with ink pads, and sometimes you want to use sprays. And so we'll cover that next week. So here I'm just going to do a print just to create a little blend to start. I'm going to dry that. Okay. Now again, you see that sludge down here? Remember, if it looks like sludge, it dries like sludge. So if you like sludge, leave it there. If you don't, well, then just get rid of it. And this I want completely gone. So I chose a paper towel over the ink towel because I wanted it completely gone. Okay. Next we're going to go in. Now same thing on my mat. See that little color right there? You see that sludge, like the dismount when I pulled that up? Even though my color maintained its integrity, when I did the tag, I don't know if you saw it, but I kind of did this and I pulled it up. It pulled all that color into the corner. You see that's kind of my same sludge corner. That too is sludge. Well, don't leave it on your palette, right? Because if you're like me, you're going to pretty much dip right into it. It seems to be the first place I always go on my palette. Okay, now we're going to start layering. What I'm going to do is show you how we can create a background, and then we can layer with microglaze. All right. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Just drawing in between layers. Now another thing to notice, you see up here on the mat, see how I don't see those little droplets? I just need a little spray just to kind of get that in there. And we'll go there, we're gonna go there. Ooh, nice. I love those little dots. See, I was going for that. If you look at your palette, you'll start to identify it. There again, there's another sludge dot. Bye-bye. Okay. Good deal. Now we'll keep going. A little bit of water. Don't be afraid to add stuff to your palette. Like your palette really is kind of your working surface. You need to go in and just see that. And the craft tool, it's everything, you guys. It's just so different than working with an embossing gun when it comes to ink, because it's drying everything. It's not blowing everything around like spin art. It's just, and I'm about an inch away. That's kind of my surface area. All right, let's go in. We're going to do a little bit more. I think I want to put a little bit of blue up here. Let's throw a little bit of pink here, and we'll put yellow right in the middle. There we go. Now here I want to move that. So if I just add a little water, see how I get that blue to bloom out a little bit? See, once you get the properties of your mediums, you just won't be afraid to dry, to use this. You'll be able to create some layers. And this is a good foundation, because now we're going to go in to microglaze and we're going to do a few things to it. All right. Okay, let's take this, start on, there we go, clean. Okay, so here's our background. Right now it's just a background. So we're going to take a stencil, okay? Let's just take that stencil, and I'm just going to untwist my wire just to take that off. Now, I think I already know kind of the ones that I want to do. I think for this one, well, I'll do this. This will be a good one. But I'm not quite sure exactly which designs I want to use. And you can store your stencils a lot of different ways. I use these wire rings. I probably shouldn't have 100 on that same wire ring. It got a little heavy last time, but that's okay. But I do like to use, I think there's going to be, oh, there's a flourish. That'll be nice, but I'm not going to use it. See, that's my problem. I can't really decide. See, because now I want to use these dots instead, because that's just how it is. All right. And you know what? I was going to choose these stencils first, and then I was like, no, I'm not going to. So, no, I got it. I just don't want the whole thing flying open, but I'm just going to take this out for now, just because I want to just pick some stencils. Y'all don't care if I choose some stencils now, do you? No? Okay, thank you. Because I do keep them in numerical order. Ooh, that's the one I was going for. Reinker. Oh, skulls. Gosh, there's so many. Ooh, scribblies. That's a good one too. Okay, I need to step away. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a tool. We're going to take a foam. Now that I have dome foam, super happy, especially for this technique because it's going to get into my stencil better than the flat one used to do. So I'm going to take the tool and I'm going to put it into Microglaze, right? Fits right in there. I'm going to give it just a little twist, okay, just to get some on the foam. Can you see that? You're not churning butter, so don't get that tons of Microglaze on there. And then I'm just going to work that in to the foam. And then I'm going to add some of this. I'm just going to put some of this through the stencil. Now Microglaze is water-based, believe it or not. So if you want to clean it off your stencil, you can use water right away. But because it also has a solvent, if you want to completely clean your stencil, just use hand sanitizer. So you can see that little reflection right there. I can wipe this off while it's wet and it will be gone. But if it dries on there, just use a little hand sanitizer. That's fine. Okay. Let's start with just that one. I think that's all I want to use for now. So I put some Microglaze on there. And now I will take my ink pads. Just use that color. A little crackling campfire in there. Let's do a little kitsch as well, just to pink it up a little bit. Okay. And then I'm just going to go in that area where I have it, and I'm going to add that color. Look at that. Instant resist. Do you see that? So I didn't have to do anything. It's going to resist that. That's the cool thing about Microglaze. Now I'm just going to dry this. Now wherever I don't have Microglaze, of course, I'm introducing a color. So that's why when I went in there, I didn't go in and just, slop through the entire tag. We're still following, the protocol of how we layer and do ink. But what's great about this, and you're going to see as soon as it's dry, is it is such an organic resist. Because let's face it, we can resist with so many things. We can resist with resist spray and embossing powder and wax and crayons and so many things. But to resist with Microglaze is very cool because my edge is so much more authentic, I think. It just has a cool edge. So there we go. So look at that. And there's no texture. There's no shine. It's a resist. It's gone. So next I'm going to get rid of this. And let's add something else. See, I knew as soon as I didn't take something, I'm going to want another stencil. I want something with kind of typography. What do you got, Mario? Have anything? Oh, let's use that. That's good. Oh, I just threw them out of order. I just threw them out of order. Okay, so I'm going to use this one. I like that whole look. Okay, so same thing. I don't know how much Microglaze is or isn't on here, so I'm just going to see. I don't know if can you guys see that? I'll try to get a little bit so you can see it. It's just a little bit on the edge. You don't need a lot of it. Okay, but you want to work it into the foam because you don't want it to touch your paper and just kind of goop up somewhere. So same thing, I'm going to go in this area and and you can see that some of that too is over those dots. So now I'm just going to take this. See, I love the ability that domed foam is going to get into that stencil. It just allows a little more slip and slide. I will say that trying to do this with a flat foam was a bit more challenging because it would want to grab onto it. Okay. Can you see it? Nope, good. Okay, that's the idea with the Microglaze. So next I'm going to do a little bit of oxide. Let's see, what do I want to do? In fact, no, I take that back. I want to do another layer. I really love that campfire, but I want it to be really fiery. So I'm just going to do that, and I'm even going to throw in a little bit of marmalade, spice marmalade oxide. Okay. So next we're going to spray this. Now, could you go over with a blending tool? Yes, you could go over it with a blending tool, but I will tell you that in order to get, I think, a more fluid organic resist, fluid ink is going to be the best because if you do a lot of blending over the top of it, it'll still resist, but it's not going to give you these cool edges because the ink can't build up around the edge. All right? So next we're going to take this and we're just going to go right through that ink. I'm going to just do a couple of times just because I want to get a nice amount of color on there. There we go. See, look at that. And it's still going to resist this, right? It's still going to resist. Now you're going to see where it starts. If I let it sit there, it's going to start soaking in there, right? Cool. And the idea behind this technique, as with any technique, I think the more you guys are, watching videos and learning, you'll learn that techniques are designed to do a look or feel, right? This was not designed to create a perfect stenciled look. If you wanted a perfect stenciled look, then you should have just stenciled it, right? This is about creating an effect that's going to create this resist that seems to appear and disappear in your background. So let me just dab that off. I'm going to clean up this mat because that's just how I am. I clean as I go. I can't help it. Even when I'm not done drying it, I looked off to the side. I'm like, oh, I got to fix that. Okay. So now I've got this layer, right? Look at that. Look at that typography and all those colors underneath it, right? Ooh. So remember, when you're layering, when you're doing this technique with microglaze, you need to make sure that you're working in contrasting colors, right? For example, if I did this top layer in blue, which I was going to do initially, any place I had blue, you wouldn't see the difference. So that's why I chose a color that I didn't really have on here, which was Crackling Campfire. But now I want to go back and add some of that color into the background. So I'm going to take a little Mermaid Lagoon. I've got my oxide blending tools on the bottom row. Just going to grab some of that. I'll throw in some of that color. See? And the reason I'm choosing that is because by having an oxide, I know that it's going to sit on whatever I put it on, including this top area. And as I said before, I'll still go in and just add a few little drips here and there. Right? Even kind of move my paper just to kind of get that ink to move, because not everything has to be a splotch. And there we go. Look at that. See, I was able to pull some of that color over the top of that oxide by moving it. Right? That's how you can add a color, but make it look like you had that color in there all along. That's the thing that a lot of people kind of forget, where you go, oh, I need to add a little bit of that. Okay, but then if you just add it and leave it, well, it's going to look like you just added it. But by adding a little water and moving the paper around, we got a color to sit on top of it. Well, that was a happy accident. And we got this bottom to really create a beautiful watermark in the corner. And look how that oxidizes. Oh, so good. And of course, this is a background. What would I do with this? I'd stamp over the top of this. I'd stamp an image in black, right? This is just about creating a cool background, or die cut something out of it. Man, that would just be really a great effect. But that's the beauty of working with microglaze. It can be a sealer. If you heat it, you can layer it, or you can continue to layer it on top of things you already did. So remember, we started with a background, then we did the dots, then we dried those, then we did the numbers, and then we dried those. So now the numbers are on top of the dots, which are on top of the background. And you could keep going. I mean, you could just keep going, and you could work in a single color or multiple colors if you wanted to work with that. Okay, moving right along. Next, we're going to talk about Reinkers. Okay, Reinkers are an essential part of ink pads, whether you're dealing with oxides or whether you're dealing with inks. Both of them have different kind of Reinkers. The original Distress inks come in these glass bottles, okay, with a little dripper. I liked it, well, one, because they look cute, but two, because one dropper full is enough to re-ink an entire pad back to its factory standard. Of course, you can always use more if you wanted to, all right? The oxides, well, those Reinkers come in this bottle. Why? Why not the fancy little glass bottle? Well, because oxide is a fusion of dye and pigment, and you can see if I can pull a color. There you go. See how the pigment's down here and the dye is up here? These you have to shake. There's a steel mixing ball in there. And that steel mixing ball cannot be in glass, because when you shake it, it broke the dropper. So don't think we didn't try that, because I did. But it broke the glass dropper, so it had to be in something that really you can shake up without worrying about dropping it. As far as how much do you put on there, because it doesn't have that little mechanism, well, you would just, you want to make sure it's the right color ink pad, which I probably didn't even bring the right, but you would just basically drizzle this on back and forth, and then go in and work in the ink. So how you properly ink a pad, first is you find, I don't even have any matchy-matchy. Look at me. Holy moly. Can you just grab me maybe picked raspberry Distress ink?
Sure.
Or actually walnut stain. Let's do that. Could you do walnut stain? Because I know this thing needs a drink. It's going to be in the brown section in the back. It's got a ring on it. It says walnut stain. You see it? Okay, well, we'll get to that. Maybe I have it. Hey, look at me. Thanks, Mario. Okay. All I had to do is read this little thing. That's from Reinker's website, by the way. Okay, so here I'm going to take my Reinker. I'm going to take off the lid, squeeze, put that back in, release, so that fills up the little dropper with color. And then I'm just going to go in and I'm going to drizzle the ink over the ink pad, put this back, close it up. Then you need to take some type of scraper. It can be a gift card, it could be just any kind of plastic scraper, and we have to work the ink because ink is a suspended medium, right? Sometimes if your ink is really dry, this will start to soak in right away. Other times it's just going to sit over the top, and that's because you have to work the ink into the surface. So I normally work from the center out because I don't want to catch the fabric edge, and I want to make sure that I'm pulling the ink out to the edge as well, because let's face it, when we're using an ink pad, we're using all part of the surface. So the first thing I want to do is I put the ink in the center, but I pull this out, and this is what's basically spreading that ink throughout the ink pad. Because if I just did a little drizzle and I put the lid on it, in about 10 minutes that would probably soak into the pad, but it's going to sit there. Remember, ink is a suspended medium. So if you apply a scribble of ink, your ink pad is nothing more than a scribble. So when you go to use it, you're going to have dark areas and light areas, and you're like, oh, I just re-inked my ink pad. Well, yeah, you put ink on the pad, but you didn't put it in the pad. And so you always have to work that into the ink pad. Whether you're doing dye ink, distress ink pads, or oxide, it's the same thing, or any kind of ink pad for that matter. You have to use something to really scrape across the surface to push that ink back into the pad. Another thing you could use is refresher, which we could get into that another time, but it's basically a clear resin that Reinker sells that you can spray over the top of anything water-based and bring it back to life. And that, you probably won't be able to find that, but that's okay. I'll get into that when we talk about refresher, but that's all right. I'll get into something else, because here's really where I'm headed, and that is creating DIYs. In a DIY age, why not have DIY ink pads? We've had these in the line for a very long time, and this gives us the ability to actually create custom distress ink pads or distress oxide pads, either one, okay? Because what these are blank ink pads, right? DIY distress ink, DIY oxide. Is there a difference? No. The only difference is the case color, right? So it's easily identifiable that this is ink and this is oxide, as well as the label. But the inside of a distress ink and a distress oxide, same material, okay? It's that same felt material. We just have two versions because, again, if I'm making ink, I want it to be an ink, and if I have an oxide, I want to be able to identify that it's an oxide. And what's great is that we can take our Reinkers and we can create rainbow pads, we can create the ultimate grunge, we can create ombre pads. Could you mix and match? Could you actually take an ink pad and put ink and oxide on the same pad? Heck yeah, you can. You can do whatever you want with these DIY pads. And how you would do that is you would start with your blank ink pad, and let's say we wanted to create something that's a little, I don't know, maybe it's just going to be very sunset. I'll just do these, right? Just because they're here, and I'll just choose 3 colors instead of showing you just this large blend. And all we're going to do is take our Reinker. We're going to start on the ink pad, and you're just going to color with this dropper, okay? Now, because when an ink pad is manufactured at Reinker, they actually take this felt and they soak it in a bath of ink, okay? So they don't have like a machine. Believe it or not, I think that you guys might be surprised unless you've seen behind the scenes videos that I used to do years ago when I worked at Reinker, and that is ink pads are handmade. These are handmade one by one, where someone is filling, someone is ringing, someone is gluing, someone is putting it in a case. This isn't just going through some sort of robotic arm. These are handmade. And so when an ink pad is made, that material is soaked in a vat of ink, then it's taken out and it's going through a wringer, kind of like a wash wringer, but it's set to a certain gauge that wrings out the appropriate amount of ink, leaving just the speck of ink into an ink pad. So every single ink is the same amount of ink. And because it's done in that process, the core itself is why it's a solid color. So like if you take a look at the core of an ink pad, you're going to see that it's got ink all the way through. Well, that's because it's soaked in. But if you're doing a DIY, just know that your core is not really going to be color all the way, but there's still going to be plenty of ink in there. So if that drives you crazy, I guess you could take your Reinker and you could go around the edges and color the core. But just want to explain that to you when you're working with this. So I'm just taking my ink and again, just kind of scribbling on here. If I want to blend, I'll overlap this slightly, because here's what you need to know about this material. Remember how I said ink is suspended, right? That means that when I put this color here, that color is not going to migrate. It's not going to run into the next color, which I know you think that it has to. Well, it's not going to. Okay, it's just not going to do that. So once you put a color there, it is stable. So if you want it to kind of blend or transition to another color, then you're going to need to go in and actually overlap those colors slightly when you do that. So I did a little picked raspberry, did a little mustard seed, a little spice marmalade, and then I went back to picked raspberry just for this. Okay. So once this is done, we're going to go to our scraper. Now, I use my scraper on brown, so I want to make sure I clean this off. I want to follow the lines of my ink pad. I don't want to go against the grain. That's why you put the lids on your ink pads, because you would move that around. So for this one, you can either start on the edge, or I like to work from the center, and I'm just going to push that ink, and you can see how that starts to blend out that line. Now when I'm going to the other side, I'm just going to wipe off that scraper onto a baby wipe, because I have a different blend right on this side. And I'm just working that ink into the pad. There we go. And you can see how it just takes that color and just blends it out. So this usually takes about 5 minutes to start soaking in. So I like to let it sit for about 5 minutes. And then once that's done, I go in and mark the label simply by taking the ink pad and dragging it over the label, right? I'll do it now. It's going to be way wetter than it should because it hasn't had 5 minutes to soak in, but you'll get the idea for the sake of the demo. So I'll just take the lid. You can put it on the table, but I'll hold it up so you can see. And I'm just going to take the ink pad the way I want to see it, and I'm going to drag it across the label just to put the color on there. And then take a paper towel, it could be a blending tool, and you're just going to swipe that excess ink just to get it to, you could use a brayer for this if you want, but this is just working that color into the label, and you have your own labeled, blended DIY pad. Now the cool thing about this, of course, is you can just use it indefinitely, right? And if you run out of those colors, well, you can re-ink them with the same colors or entirely new colors if you want to, but you can't replace the label, but yeah, you can do that. The thing to remember about an oxide, because of what it is, right? When you do that same thing on the label, it is going to oxidize your label. Hello, that's a DIY. There's no way around that. That if you rub this over the top, it's still going to oxidize versus what it does on here. Can you seal these with microglaze? Yes, you can, right? If you don't want these, because this is still going to be reactive with water, and if you didn't want that, well, you would want to seal that with microglaze. Okay, so that is how you can create a custom ink pad. Well, what can we do with these custom ink pads? Well, a lot of things, okay? Let's just take some specialty, a little coated paper. We can take our custom blend. Let's get our little ink stand over here. There we are. We're going to take our little brayer. These are the new Distress brayers. I'm just going to make sure that the feet are up, and then I'm just going to roll across. Okay, roll and lift, because we just want to get that color on there. And then we can just take our ink and we can just brayer this onto paper. Easy enough, right? Just go back in and just go to the next line, and we're just overlapping with that, and that's what's going to create that easy blend transition here. Okay, look at that, pretty simple, right? That's a simple background. Easy to do. I love kind of that jaggedy edge. Now, could you do this with blending tools and all that? Absolutely, you could. You could do whatever you want. And this is still a reactive background, right? So I could still go in, I can add my water to it. This is what I was saying about like Galaxy. This happens to be specialty stamping, so it's super sensitive. All right, so this is going to give me just a really cool background to work from. Easy. And I like saying that you do your DIY pads in colors that you're going to normally work with, right? You don't need one for every single one of them, but you're going to have kind of your go-to jam, and maybe your go-to jam happens to be a rainbow, or like I said here, maybe it's a tropical sunset, right? A tropical sunset that you want to to work with. So let's just take watercolor cardstock, and you're like, all right, well, I want to create kind of a tropical vibe. All right, well, a couple things we know. One, if we start with wet paper, we're going to get an immediate blend. That's certainly not going to hurt this ink pad at all. So that's just going to allow me to go directly from my ink pad and create a watercolor background directly from the pad because I started with wet paper. And so that just looks like you went in with a paintbrush and did all of your blending. And we can still add water just to get even more movement, right? We can get those just by holding the paper up. See how we can get those striations of color? So an easy way to watercolor stripes. And you don't need to have this many. You know, if you only wanted it to go like an ombre effect from light to dark, we could do the same thing. And this is what's giving it the effect. Now, the more water I add, I'll just show you. Just really kind of hose this out so we're not getting, you know, the speckly flecklies on there. We're getting that striation of color. So see, if you just miss the water, you're going to get those speckles. But if you really spray the water, you're going to get that movement. And you can even have the movement go against the grain, right? We can go opposite direction. See how that color is starting to move into the other? Gosh, you could have so much fun with just making your own blends depending on your paper. Again, whether you're working with watercolor cardstock or whether you're working with a tag or whatever. So take a look at this oxide, okay? Oxide's really cool. I'll do this one on a tag. Love this. So this one has a really interesting blend. It goes from like speckled egg into chipped sapphire into ground espresso, pumice stone, and black soot, right? I love this. And what's great about this is kind of my go-to thing. So sometimes it's like a really good grunge. So don't always think of DIY as a rainbow ink pad. Doesn't always have to be stripy. It can actually be a palette of your go-to colors, right? So I already know that when I take my background and I go into these colors, I'm going to get the colors that I like on my background. Make sense? Yeah. So you can do a DIY of your favorite colors without worrying about thinking, oh, this is a rainbow pad. I don't do rainbows. I don't do that stripe. Well, no, but if you do a lot of ink blended backgrounds, maybe your favorite brown combo is, I don't know, walnut stain and frayed burlap. Okay, well, make a DIY 50-50. And then with that one pad, you've got both colors. Maybe you want that with a splash of vintage photo distress reinker in with your oxide. Well, mix that up too, right? Because you can certainly put that in there. Look at that. So moody. Love it. All right. Yeah, this is the part that I really love about thinking about creating your DIYs. So Cindy asks, can you blend colors on the pad? If you're talking about like mixing colors, yes. Yes, meaning if you wanted definitely more of a transition, then you would just start the next color inside the other color. But wherever you put it, it's going to stop. All right, so there you go. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. So this is what I was saying, like I'll do just a couple more backgrounds, but look at how, see when I said it's moody? It's just a good moody grunge, isn't it? Yeah. And that's why I said you have to do you. You have to do what you like with the products that you have. And knowing what's available to you, I think, is also super important. Okay? So we're going to talk about watercolor real quick. So there is an amazing artist on Instagram. Manzi Makes is her name on Instagram. And I saw her on Instagram because she started doing watercolor with distress. Oh, she is. Well, hello. And you know, watercoloring with distress was nothing new, but I've never really seen anyone just totally champion just watercoloring with distress so consistently and amazing. And so I reached out to her. I'm just like, man, your work is unreal. And you have to check it out because really what she does with inks is just amazing. And I talked about this last week about creating palettes with inks and crayons and all that. And that is another option for reinkers. In addition to reinking your pad, in addition to creating custom pads, it is an amazing medium for coloring, watercoloring or anything, because this is a concentrated version of the ink pad. The color in this is so intense that a couple of drops in a palette is all you need. And by creating your own palette, these are just Ranger palettes. We sell them empty. you can put your ink in there and it will never dry up. I think this ink has been in here for maybe 5 years, if not more, and you can see it will not dry up. It might turn kind of gel-like, but it's still, as soon as you touch a wet brush in there, it's going to wet. Now, mine, I actually have a combo between Oxide and Reinker, right? But you could just do one of just inks and have one of just oxides, whatever you want to do. But the beauty of having the palette, and I'll just show you, because I have a couple of colors here. So we're going to take, oh, I don't have them. I don't have it again. Oh, I can take Walnut Stain. All right, that'll be good. All right, I'm going to take an ink pad, and I'll also take a Reinker. And I'm just going to do literally a drop, okay? That's just going to show you, and then I'll get into the painting part. Now you can use a water brush, you can use a paintbrush, you can use whatever you want to use for this, but we're just going to show you on watercolor paper. So if I take a water brush, it's clean, okay, and I go into an ink pad, just swipe through that color, and I go in watercolor, it's nice, right? It gives me the ability to blend, but that's going to be the intensity of Walnut Stain. Now if I go in and I touch into a Reinker, okay, just on the tip of my brush, and I color, yep, not a singer. You get it, right? See the difference? Same color, right? Right or wrong? No. But if you're going for watercolor, you would take this brush, and that's why you saw that I like basically picked up the drop. That's why you would want a palette like this, because if you're going to do watercolor, you really only need to just lightly touch just a little bit of the bristles into that color, because that's what's going to give you that wonderful, and this happens to be an oxide, that's what's going to give you the wonderful control of color, right? So let me just clean this off. Just squeeze out that. Let me just go into a little bit of blue over here with my Distress ink. Like, look at that salty ocean. Look at how intense it is. And that was literally the very tip of the brush. Just the tip, because if you pick up more, right, if I went in and picked up quite a bit of Reinker, then you can see exactly the ability. And that's what makes watercoloring with Reinkers so nice, is you get those way more control of depth than what you would with just an ink pad, right? That's the difference, okay? So whether it's oxide, whether it's Reinker, whether it's a little bit of both, hey, you can totally do that. And it's a great way to also create quick backgrounds, right? If you wanted to just go in and create a quick blended background, a water brush is a wonderful way to do that. I'm just going to use a flat water brush for that. And I'll pick, let's just take a little dot of some chipped sapphire, spray my paper, because then I don't have to worry about it. And I can just pick up some of that color and just start creating a beautiful, beautiful blend, because I'm on my watercolor paper and I'm already starting with wet paper. And that just gives me the ability to create a nice soft blend with Reinker. And ink pad, yeah, could you do that with ink pad? Sure. But you can see here, that's the ink pad, and I'll go back into the Reinker. I mean, you get it, right? You can see that you just get so much more intensity with your Reinker, but there is no right or wrong. Just a fun way to create backgrounds. Or you can just snap this off so you have a large round, and we don't want lines, we can just mix these together just with our brush and create kind of a mottled blended background. You do whatever you want, because this is a synthetic brush, so it does allow a lot more flexibility. And then if I want to go back to a flat, I just squeeze the top to get those bristles flat again, and then take that little plastic ferrule piece, put that in, and snap it on. So there you go. A couple things with Reinkers. All right, moving right along. Got a couple more tips to share with you on ink and oxide, and then we'll get into Q&A. Right, okay. Another thing that's important to know about Distress. Wow, so good. Yeah, definitely check her out. She's got such good things. All right, look at that. Oh, that's a good one. Okay. The next thing we're just going to touch base on is embossing. because what people need to understand about certain inks is that just because it's a water-based ink or just because it is a pigment ink or a dye, whatever that happens to be, I think you really have the potential of doing different things with your inks if you explore. And one of the things to know about Distress Ink, both Distress Ink and Oxide, is because of their water reactive formulation, their wicking, these have a high amount of resin in these, okay? Not glycerin, but resin. And these resins stay wet a little bit longer than a traditional dye ink pad, which means you can emboss with these dyes. Now I know last week we talked about using embossing ink, right? VersaFine, Versamark, all those things. And I'm not saying that you can't emboss with anybody else's ink. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that this, because it is a wetter ink, it gives you a slightly longer open time to stamp with either Distress Ink or Oxide and emboss with it. So let's just take a look at some of the samples. So this one, this is just showing you, let me get my little samples in check. Okay, all right. So this is showing on watercolor paper. This is stamped, and this is tumbled glass. I wanted to choose a very light color. This is Distress Ink, and this is Oxide. So I'll say when you stamp with Oxide, you get, I think, a much crisper detail because it's a dye and pigment than you would with just a dye ink. You can see that just the dye wants to soak into the paper. It doesn't give you nearly as vivid of an image as an ink. So if you're just stamping, Oxide is a great Distress Ink for just doing your stamping because you're going to get more detail. If you want to work on darker paper like craft, this is tumbled glass ink on craft paper. This is tumbled glass Oxide. And look at that. I love the fact that you still get to see this color on dark surfaces. So again, if you're going to stamp on darker papers, whether that's craft or a color cardstock, you'll want to work with an Oxide because these are translucent. So that light blue that we just saw is completely overtaken by the brown paper underneath because it's translucent. You see through it. These, because it has pigment, makes it opaque, and now the color sits on the top. But both of these, of course, can be embossed. Now it doesn't change how it stamps, but it does give you a little bit more definition because you can see that unlike working with embossing ink that is often thick, that holds on to a lot of powder, right? Because some people go, oh, you need super fine detail and you need this, you need that. Yeah, you can work with those different kind of powders, but I'm telling you that it really doesn't matter the powder if you have too much ink on your stamp, right? If you stamp with a really wet pigment ink or a wet embossing ink, you know what I'm talking about. It's a hot mess. You've got stuff everywhere. So what's great is this is Distress Ink with a clear embossing powder, and this is Oxide. Both of them have been stamped, poured regular clear embossing powder on it, and heat embossed. And the great thing about this is now I could ink over the top of this, and this is going to be a resist, right? Because it's been sealed in embossing powder. And the same thing is on craft. Now the difference on craft, this didn't change at all. This was still, you know, it just became like a darker brown, I guess. But the difference with embossing Oxide on craft is you do lose the oxidation. And this didn't even have water in it. But see how this, because the dye soaked into the paper and it left the pigment on the top, so that's why you have that oxidized effect. You kind of lose that a little bit when you emboss it, but still very cool, right? You can see that great shine. So just something to think about, that when you're working with your inks, especially inks and oxides, play around with doing embossing, right? It's really great that we can stamp and emboss. So like this one, where it is embossed, that means I can go in with a blending tool. Let me find, there we go. I knew I had one over here that still had foam on it. And let's just take a little vintage photo, right? And I can go right over this. And because it's been embossed, it's going to keep that nice, true color of tumbled glass, whether it's been done in ink or oxide. So that's another benefit of doing embossing with your colors, because then you can just do some really cool and fun layers. And whether that is just blended or whether we've done a background, right? So let's just say we had some ink right there and we did this wet. You're still not going to affect the embossing powder because the embossing powder is plastic, right? It even looks better wet. Now notice I went to a heat tool. I like working with Reinker's heat tool because it's going to take a long time before this embosses. So this allows me to use ink on top of my embossing without worrying about remelting my embossing powder. So another reason why I always use this over ink. But take a look at these butterflies. Like they went from just something really kind of basic, and then we can go in and add layers. Pretty cool, right? That's just using Distress. Now, keep in mind what we learned last week. Apply that to what we just learned right now. What if we did a glaze, right? Think about that. You could take a color of ink and alter it by whatever color glaze you put over the top. So for example, peacock feathers, if you put a little speckled egg, you're going to add a little gray to this because speckled egg is kind of a gray, green, blue. So that's going to alter this color. If you started with a super light color like stamping in tumbled glass and add speckled egg, it's just going to change the color. And so you can have so many variations of your glaze by changing your underneath ink color. Right? So many different options when it comes to working. Okay, one more thing and we're going to wrap it up to questions. And that is putting all this together, right? Everything that you know about ink and oxide and what to use when and where and how, and you can watercolor and we can stamp and we can do all that. Putting all that together to create a background is quite exciting, right? I like to use a lot of different things for my background. So here I'm just going to take, there is some Distress ink. Now we're going to go in with a little bit of oxide. I'm going to throw some ink on here. I'm going to throw a little oxide, and I'm going to start with just some greens and blues for this. I lied. I'm going to throw in a little campfire because I want to. Then I'm going to take a Reinker, okay? And I'm going to take a Reinker, and I'm just going to use the glass, right? Just that little nozzle, and I'm just going to go in and just draw through that stuff, right? I didn't squeeze a lot out, just whatever came off of the glass. And I do this with ink for that Reinker. And now I'm going to spray everything. Okay. What's cool about this, what I like about it, is it's really going to give me something very, very, well, grungy. Now, it doesn't have to be grungy. This could be bright yellow or red or whatever. But watch what happens when I take my paper and I go into those areas that have color, make a print, lift that off. I'm going to get those really intense kind of age spots, grunge spots in there because of that brown Reinker. May not be for everybody, right? It may be something where you're like, oh, I don't really like that. Okay, well, it might be a color that you want. Maybe you're going to do a background that's just ocean, and you might do a little drag of a blue Reinker, so you get where it almost looks like some deeper shades of blues for bubbles or backgrounds. And now I'm just going to go in and just do my normal layering. I'm going to try to avoid that if I can. But you're going to see by, oh here, I'll just get rid of that. You'll see by adding that Reinker, we created this really intense color of my choosing, happened to be brown, into our background. And you'll see that it plays really nice with anything you put over the top. And you would think, oh man, that's going to totally overtake everything. But it doesn't, see? It just creates a really cool effect on your background. Look at that. And wherever that Reinker remains on our sheet, that's what's going to show up super, super intense. Great background. Great, great background. So don't be afraid to use your Reinker, but use it sparingly. If you go in and you just start squirting that on there, well, that's on you, right? Because Reinker is a concentrated version of that ink pad. So just those little drops that almost seem non-existent, that you can't even see most of them, they actually show up, right? What a cool background. Just really, really fun. I'm going to go in a little bit more just because I see a little bit. I want to add a little bit more campfire into that corner. Add a little water. Break it up. See, everything you, like once you just know it and learn it, you just won't be afraid to do it. See, it needed a little fire up there, didn't it? Okay. Yeah. And just that Reinker is what's creating that really rich, deep, dark walnut because that's what's down there. Okay. I could go on forever with backgrounds, guys. You know that. It's just, the whole point is just to keep playing. Now I'm going to just spray some water just because I can lighten some of those areas up with a little water and just brings everything together. Plus, the more water we add, it's going to make the oxide that I used oxidize even more. Yummy, yummy background. But that's the one done with Reinker, right? So take a look at that. See, isn't that beautiful? And this wouldn't have to be grungy, but see, by using inks and oxides, we're getting that soft, creamy, dreamy float around, but then we're getting the intense color, the campfire, that mermaid lagoon that was right there, a little bit of, I love that walnut stained Reinker under there. Just so many things that we can do to play with your ink. So what started out as, you know, a bag of Skittles, because we can certainly keep color. It doesn't mean that you have to stick with a palette. It doesn't mean that it always has to be grungy. It could have even bits of purple, because different papers, right? Watercolor is going to be different than the white heavy stock, going to be different than mixed media, going to be different than when we work on coated papers. There's just a lot of options, but more than anything is identifying the difference, like what makes an oxide different than an ink pad. Well, inks are translucent dyes. Oxide is a fusion of dye and pigment, right? Could you use just either or? Absolutely. But using them together is really, really cool. All right. I got one more thing. I said I wasn't going to, but I'm going to because, well, I want to. Because I just want to share one other thing that's specific to ink pads that I think is important to kind of remember. All right. We okay, Mario? Okay. I told him. I ask Mario all the time because I tell him, like, keep me in check on time, because it could be 5 hours and I'll keep talking. And then he would be like, people got really bored and then they left. And okay.
That's not happening.
All right. So I'm going to take a new fresh piece of foam, because remember that one had Microglaze on it, right? That one's that. And you can leave it like in a little Ziploc bag so you can have it dedicated to glaze. So this is a clean, dry, domed foam. And then I'm going to work with a stamp tool. This is just going to be my platform. I'm going to open that up. Let's see what I got here. Just going to be off camera real quick, just looking for, what do I want to do? Let's do the professor. He'll be a good set. It could be anything. No, I don't think I want to get into that.
You actually find anything you want?
I can't find much, I'll be honest, but I'm gonna, he's too big. I have so much stuff over here, you guys. Hey, let's just stick to this.
Just pull everything out.
I haven't,
there you
I had everything in my binder and then I just threw caution to the wind. All right, I'm gonna take a couple of stamps. These are just, I'll do a butterfly because it's the one that was sitting on the top, but I also want something with a little text, okay? Then I will take, I'll just do a tag for this, okay? Now I want to work on this entire surface, so I don't want to have the magnets in my way, but you could certainly use your magnets. This is just some sticky grid. This is from Sizzix. I use it a lot. It's just basically kind of a double-sided post-it note kind of sticky stuff that you use for die cutting, but it's a great way to put something in place, and then I don't need to use these. So now this is not going to go anywhere. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'll take my stamps and I'm going to place this one down. I'll work with this one here. I'll just place that, and I'm going to do a little bit of smudge stamping, and you may have seen this before. It's quite fun to do. You can do it with ink or oxides, but I will say you're going to get a little bit more play with oxides. But what we're going to do is we're going to explore both. Okay, so let's take a little bit of oxide. I'm going to ink this up. I've got to hold that lid. Tap, tap, tap on my stamp. Okay, going to go down, move this here, perfect. Stamp that down, stamp with purpose. Lift this up, dry foam, smudge. Okay, and this is just going to be in a circular motion. All that's doing is just taking some of that ink that's there, and it's just creating kind of a faded look. You see that? Excellent. Okay. Then while that stamp is still there, I'm going to go in with an ink. Now I just want to wipe off my stamp. So I'm just going to take, I just took a little baby wipe. That's all you have to do, just to get the pigment off. That's all we're doing. And now I'm going to take my ink pad over that same stamp, and now I'm just going to stamp it. And that's going to provide the detail of the haze. You'll see this in a minute as we build. As we build. Okay. Next up, let's do this. Okay. Oh yeah, I think I'll go across here. That'll be good. Move that down there. Okay. So for this one, let's see. We'll do a little, I really want some peeled paint. Mario, would you mind grabbing me a peeled paint oxide, please? Sure. Thanks. I like to often use the same color as an ink or an oxide because I think that it just, it allows, he knew where those colors were. Thank you.
Relax.
Just going to go in, ink this up. And you could do this with a lot of different kind of backgrounds. Sometimes it could be collage related like this, okay? Or sometimes it could just be a specific image. This is great for fall leaves or, you know, any kind of specific background. So there's our oxide layer. Same foam, same dry. You don't have to change it in between colors. And we're just going to smudge this out, okay? So all this is doing is just taking some of that color and just moving it around. Then I'm just going to quickly swipe off the pigment, go into the Distress Ink version, and just add some ink. And now I'll stamp over the top of that. And that's just going to kind of give it the definition. So what's cool about this, now I've done smudge stamping before where I just smudge it and forget it. But this is kind of a double stamp smudge, right? It almost sounded like a gymnastic move, like a double stamp smudge with a back handspring. But the idea is that you're putting color down and you're smudging that color around, and that just kind of saves a bit from ink blending, if you will, right? Then you have to go back and blend everything because you're doing it while you're stamping that image. Okay, so let's take this guy. We'll do this, that little seal right there. I'm going to end up using the Professor, I'm sure of it. I just know it. I know it. I know it. Okay, let's see. I don't really have the same color of that. So this one I think I'll, no. I'll mix it up a little bit. I'm going to use like an orange oxide for that. Okay, smudge that around. But then I'll do my detail in Campfire. Oh, I got a little oxide on there. And you easily can see oxide on the stamp too. So now I'm just switching to Campfire and put that down. Look at that. Just a cool way that we can layer our stamps using our ink pads, right? Really, really simple. All right, let's do one more. All right, so I think on this one, I'll put this over the top here. Perfect. Place that down. Let's do, I'm going to do a little blue. Ooh, I've got some intense blues. That's all right. Let's go in with little faded jeans, oxide. Okay, now on this one, I know where this is going to go, and I don't want it to go over this little circle. So I'm just going to clean off, just kind of edit part of my stamp. So see what I did there? See how I cleaned off some of that ink around that area? So this way, when I stamp it, I don't have to worry about covering up what I just did. It kind of looks like you did masking, but that's just like faux masking because I don't have to worry about that. Same thing, just going to smudge. That's going to just soften that blue a little bit. And then we'll go in with an ink. And I'm going to just do the same thing. Put the color down. Edit the stamp. So again, I'm just taking just a baby wipe that I've been using just to clean off some of that area and go in and add the detail. All right, so right now I've got just a very cool background that has been inked and smudged. So I'll hold this up before I kind of stamp the focal image. But see that? It just creates kind of a soft look, but then you also get the detail by double stamping it with your Distress ink. Just kind of a cool way to do that. Then we'll take, is he even going to fit this? Yeah, he will. There we go. We'll take the Professor. Now this is the Professor 2. He's a bigger one of the two, but we will certainly put him there. That's good. Let's see, does he fit in there? Yeah, he sure does. Okay. Now for this guy, we're going to stamp in something permanent. I want it to be right on the top of this. So I'm just going to take archival ink. Now, if you have a regular archival pad or a mini, either one, yeah, it would be, I would certainly like a bigger one. So I'm going to kind of cheat. I'm going to do a jet black archival. Here, where's my, let's do that. I'm just going to take the case. Ah, there we go. There, now it doesn't make that banging sound. So I'm going to just ink this up. This is just jet black archival. The only difference is this is just a little darker black soot Distress archival. So I'm just going to go over it with that. So this way I have a nice layer of ink, but this only comes in a mini ink pad. So I'm just going to tap that on there. Okay, so we have a nice layer of archival. Now the reason I'm stamping in archival, could you stamp with Distress? Yes, you can. But by stamping in archival, archival is oil-based, And so that's going to always sit on top of whatever you do. Okay. So by doing that, it's really, really a great way that we can ensure that whatever we stamp, and all of the archivals, they're just called distress archivals because these are distress colors of this ink formulation, but those inks will sit on top of anything you put them on, because oil will always sit on top of this water-based ink. And so now when I take this off, take a look at that. We have the great detail of that, but you can see all that smudging, all that layer. And because oxides have that pigment, the pigment is always going to dominate dye. So it's still going to show up even through your image because we use both. And you could still go in and do some blending and flicking and doing all sorts of things with it. But it's just another fun thing to do with ink pads. I think sometimes, you know, I do a lot of stuff with stamps, and it's always great to work with stamps in that way. This is just going to come off with archival cleaner. So you need to use that because distress is going to come off with water, but that's going to come off with archival cleaner, which Reinker sells, and it'll take it right off. But yeah, just some interesting ways that we can incorporate stamps with our inks. Oh, look at that. I just threw everything behind me. You should see what's going on back there. It is. It's okay. But hopefully that just inspires you, because sometimes, again, this is about being inspired to use the stuff that you have and maybe try different things that maybe you haven't done before, which is think of your stamps as tools. Think of mixing and matching your inks and being able to smudge them. And could you smudge the distress ink? Yes, you can. You can smudge both of those, not a problem at all. And I would still go in and add some ink around this, right? So when you have an edge like this, some people would just freak their freak, like, oh no, I didn't get ink there. I didn't do whatever. No problem. Just get out our, whoop, there we go. I do this every week. Get out our trusty ink stand. Mario finds more stuff on the windowsill that's right in front of me, because that's what I like to do. Oh no, that was just a brayer that went rolling off. That's okay. Then I'm going to take this guy, just going to add a little bit of blue over here, you know, just to add a little color. Because see, we can just bring those colors over. Now I don't like that blue there, so now I'm going to go back to brown. I should just leave brown in here. There we go.
Good shots for your blog.
Yeah. Okay, do a little blending, do a little flicking with some water. There we go. This one I want to add a little contrast, so I'm going to lift this before it dries and take a look at that. Yeah, now we're talking. See, you just have fun. I could just keep going and going and having fun with all the inks and oxides, because that is truly my passion, is just playing and understanding that as soon as you get the properties, as soon as you get the fact that this really was not designed as an either or line. This is simply an extension of what else you can do with your distress inks to give them a whole other level. And while I do understand that some people love the opacity, the blendability, the stampability, all the creaminess of an oxide, all those are true. But never forget these, because these really are what, in my opinion, bring everything to life, bring so much more vibrancy and punch to your oxides by adding that little extra bit of ink. So hopefully that was it. This just scratches the surface. I would consider this like basic 101, because there's a million things that we can do with inks and oxides. But you know, that to me is kind of my favorite.